Insurgency Sandstorm has a ton of weapons, so today I compiled all of my weapons lists into the ultimate tier list, covering every single gun from rifles to pistols. Here are my guidelines. Remember, this is just my subjective opinion, yours will differ to mine. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you did enjoy. And with all that said and done, let's get into it. Now the M16A2. This is a great safe all-American gun, right? Controlled, very accurate, especially with its burst. This thing acts as if it's got a magnet attached to enemies, right? But the best part about this gun is how cheap it is, right? You can buy it for about £3. Bosh. Which is of course very cheerful. It only costs one whole supply in this economy, making it very powerful and cheap for modes like Outpost. If you crave PTSD, that is. But despite its accuracy relatively being pretty reliable, its burst does feel a little bit inconsistent with control compared to the upcoming brother. You know, each round spreads loosely alongside a slight delay, right? Meaning you'll probably have to follow up or end up overshooting and run out of ammo quicker. I will say I don't like how the carry handle also doesn't come off, you know? So you kind of got to put a scope on this, but even if you do, it looks like a skyscraper, man. But I will say the iron sights are pretty clear. So the M16A2 is an incredibly super cheap pick, which is quite reliable. You kind of get what you pay for, alright? So I'm giving the M16A2 a B tier. Now the M16A4, it's very similar to the M16A2 of course, you know, same caliber, burst and accurate, but I find this one to be much more controllable, consistent, flexible and better handling with more modern attachments rather than that onk of a carry handle, right? You know, and speaking of the M16A4's handle, it comes off this time, right? Welcome to the 21st century, lad. You know, this fella's basically the same gun, but it bangs out those exercises 50-year-old single mums do, right? Trust me, they work. And especially with the burst, right? I find it much more easier to control, and it feels like an actual monster at ranges, right? Its shots are tighter, meaning it will put people down in one burst instead of your burst missing a few or overshooting, meaning no follow-ups are really needed if you're accurate enough and the carry handle comes off, right? So that means you're saving ammo as well, and to me it's just a more sizable upgrade to an already good cheap gun. Its burst will dry you clean of bullets fairly quickly though, which unfortunately you'll probably be using because that's the strongest part of this gun, but still you pay a little bit more and you get a little bit better. So for me, I'm giving the M16A4 an A tier. Now the SG552, this is a cheap and flexible Swiss fella, right? This is the guy that you know that compensates for zero personality with trendy clothing. Now, honestly, I can't believe Bape used to be cool. And by that I mean it has a lot of attachments, right? You can basically play dress to impress with this gun. It's a compact weapon, so it's reliable in CQB, and it's lovely to handle, I must say, honestly. Swinging it around like it weighs about 2 kilograms. Feels lovely to use. Anyway, its recoil and its fire rate is also pretty tolerable. But the weakness does come from its damage, right? You know, despite being 5.56, it still feels like a Nerf dart, right? I don't know what it is about it. It could be something to do with its penetration or velocity, but it will take 3 to 5 blood clot rounds to kill some teenager with a backpack. And don't even try running it stock. 20 round mags is a bit of a joke, right? You have to bring an extended mag, otherwise you'll be reloading just as much as a chronic gooner, right? Its accuracy naturally falls off at range too. It is a good pick, it's stronger in CQB, but considering how many rifles this game has, it does get outshone by the others. Therefore, I'm giving the SG552 a B tier. Now the AKM, the iconic Soviet rifle, formerly named the Automat Kalashnikova. Let's just stick to the AKM, alright? First off, I'm a sucker for any AK platforms, right? It's just something about them. It's just how clean they look, right? Handling wise, I love it, right? But let's not pretend this thing kicks like it's got personal beef with your shoulder, especially at range. The recoil is touchy, but what I love is the close to mid combat, right? It's simple and reliable, cheap but damn powerful, right? Got great penetration with its 7.62 rounds, meaning dogs will get laid flat in 2 direct shots. There's something satisfying with running around with an AK, alright? I feel like a stalker, alright? I'm no cheeky bricky for downkill. But like I said, it's not the most controllable, right? You'll need attachments, otherwise this just feels barbaric. And especially at range, it struggles with, and its recoil can be a tad bit crazy. Otherwise, I really like this fella. He's iconic as hell, you can't deny that at least. So I'm giving the AKM an A tier. Now the AR7090, right? Utmost Italian smoothness, right? Handling, power, speed, accuracy, customization. This is by far one of the most handiest guns I've ever used in this game. There's not a lot that can go wrong with it. And man, it sounds so chunky and beautiful, right? It's versatile and strong in every range, taking mostly 2 shots to kill. The velocity is strong and thick as well, you know? It's like the bastard took Viagra, and it's got good penetration. we are still talking about guns, right? And for me, it's more personable since it's got to be used in the right hands because its recoil is very noticeable. It is indeed slower firing, and of course its cost can make it a wee bit expensive for attachments, in which you'll definitely be wanting a scope since it's pretty similar to the M16A2. It's got this tall ass carry handle with the same grim iron sights. I understand if people don't agree with this one. It's got to be used in the same hands. You know, aggressive players, kind of brain dead. That's all me. I love it. All right. So I'm giving the AR7090 a low S tier. Now the AUG A3. This Austrian bad boy is as smooth as your mama's ass. No, its recoil is practically non-existent, right? It's very accurate and overall one of the most handleable guns in the game. Certainly one I would recommend for new gen since it's so reliable, you know? There's rarely a scenario that it lets me down in, alongside being fairly customizable, alright? This is pretty beginner-friendly gun in my opinion. All I'd say is due to its bullpup design, it does feel a wee bit hefty, you know? I do love the look of bullpups, but yeah, they're not as agile as some of the previous guns. So basically, if a dude rushes you from a corner, then it has got a minor grey spot, and it doesn't quite hit as hard since it's at 5.56 rounds, alright? So it's just under being a meta gun, right? It's just not quite there though. It had its shot and it's so close, but still a really good rifle. The AUG A3 is getting high A tier from me. Now the G36K, right? A genuine Deutsch fella. You know, he's legit since he doesn't stick out too much. It ain't a master, but it's versatile and dependable, alright? It works in pretty much everything, but it doesn't excel, you know? A decent, healthy choice that doesn't breach some of the other guns. It's clean and handy, you know, recoil is super easy to control, even in burst with a good fire rate as well. But we go back to the damage, it's kind of mid at 5.56 again, and overall, because of how saturated this game's rifle list is, it does get outclassed in my opinion. The rifle class compared to the other classes in this game is as saturated as gaming playthroughs on YouTube in 2026. I should know, I used to do them. You know, I should also probably say that Insurgency's guns are pretty much all stat based, and with these being your only differences, then a lot of them kind of get clumped together, ultimately playing the same. No rifle in this game is inherently bad, alright? Because look, guns hurt, alright? Bullets hurt. Keep that in mind because there's a lot more. The G36K is still a good pick, so I'm giving it a high B tier. Now the QBC97, it's basically, I can say the exact same thing as a G36K, alright? It's a reliable Chinese gun, laser accurate, forgiving, smooth, controlled, and overall just good at everything. But once again, it doesn't quite breach the meta for me, you know? It's still at 5.56 rounds, so it's not completely headshot, which, let me preface that 5.56 caliber rounds isn't exactly something that makes a gun inherently worse, but since there's so many guns that are more controlled, a higher caliber, and remember this is based off co-op, you need as many bullets as you can get, and you need to put the enemies down as quick as possible. So for me, this kind of does play a part in putting this gun down compared to the other one, same as the other 5.56. And to be fair, certainly it does kind of feel like a BB gun in my opinion, since it's so steady, you'll barely have to move, which is a really good thing of this gun, you know? It'll stay on target, as long as your aim is good, obviously. But I will say that BB joke does go for its damage as well. So same again, the QBZ97 is getting high B tier from me. Now the AK-74. Yeah, who doesn't like the Soviet AK platform, am I right? Like I said before. As is the theme that we've been on, it is just another safe pick that doesn't excel in much. It's safe and reliable, but not special. Now, I don't want to regurgitate what I just said, but look man, we've got a lot of guns to get through. So the AK-74 is getting a B tier for the same reasons as before. Now the Alpha AK. This bad boy is your premium Russian AK, alright? There's a reason why this is called the Alpha. It's more expensive, sure, but you should still have more than enough points to put it on the necessities at least. Melting down, it's the AKM but just superior. If you're willing to take the plunge of its price and putting you in debt, then you're getting a gun that punches holes through dudes, right? Using 7.62 rounds. Naturally coming with increased penetration, and despite that, its recoil and heft is surprisingly low. It truly doesn't feel like a 7.62 caliber, right? Certainly hits like one though, I must say. It's basically a smooth two-shot killer. This makes it versatile in close and mid-range, you know? It's one of the most forgiving rifles for its caliber, you know? Another plus is it being a goddamn AK, man. Like I said, bro, who doesn't like AKs? Naturally, it is still slower to handle than some of the other rifles, but for me, the Alpha AK is getting an S tier. Now the L85A2, right? This chunky British fella feels different, alright? Fun fact, this is the British Army standard issue, British fun fact of the day. Yeah, I do like how it looks, I must say. You know, lovely little gun, right? If I was gun sexual, I would mate with this one. What am I even talking about anymore? Anyway, as usual, its recoil is very low, you know, feeling like a pellet gun. You know, it's another consistent gun, good at range and holding angles with great accuracy. But for me, it's just another fairly reliable and predictable gun. However, as much as I like bullpups, they definitely feel slower to handle, especially in CQB with its average fire rate. But really, it's just standard again. In my opinion, it does get outclassed if you're willing to put money into the other guns, once again at 5.56 rounds, especially considering it's fairly pricey just for another relatively safe pick. So I'm giving the L85A2 a B tier. Now the SKS, so this is where things get a bit cheap and cheerful in the Soviet way. It's very cheap with its damage at 7.62, that hits like the gonorrhea you received last week. Nobody told you about that yet? Oh. So this bastard plays more like a micro sniper, right? You'll drop fellas in 2 shots and it's very accurate. However, here's the kicker, it's semi-auto, which with the nature of this game in co-op being rushed by the population of Yemen, means this old chap can slow you down. So if you miss, then it might be GG's, especially in CQB. If you crack, then it's a good cheap powerhouse, but it comes with the risks and there are better options. Therefore, the SKS is getting a C tier from me. Now the Galil Sar. Now this is one of those B tiers we were on about before, right? It's a consistent gun, versatile along all ranges, and is good value due to being in the gunner class. This is a little hybrid between rifle and LMGs, so I didn't know whether to include this one, but I did anyway. What are you going to do about it? Due to it being a hybrid LMG/rifle, it certainly will need a grip for its recoil though, you know? The dude's a little rabid, as you may come to expect. And of course, it's a bit more hefty for CQB scenarios. It doesn't specialize once again as a rifle, but it's a very strong pick. It goes for the same for LMGs when I get onto my LMG list. It doesn't really specialize in much because it's trying to balance itself out and it spreads itself a little too thin amongst 2 very different classes. As a rifle, I'm giving the Galil Sar a B tier. Now the F2000, alright? No idea who the hell made this intergalactic looking ass gun, but this thing looks like something straight out of Halo, alright? But it's actually from Belgium. I dig it a lot, right? Fella's an insane CQB and mid-range potential, since its fire rate is like a conveyor belt of 5.56 rounds, meaning its lighter caliber doesn't matter due to its sheer amount of pressure the gun makes. This is the little balance I was talking about before. 5.56 rounds can be better than 7.62 rounds if you overwhelm them with so many bullets that it doesn't even matter anymore. This makes it even more friendly for players who just want to blast bullets everywhere, you know? This does mean though that it's not as flexible for other ranges, well, not as universally reliable as other picks, I must say. If you do choose full auto, then you'll run out of bullets quick as hell, right? You know, just as quick as my bank when putting petrol in 2026. I might as well just walk everywhere. This is getting outrageous, man. It's also quite pricey, especially considering it's got really poor customization. It does come with a built-in optic, you know? It's a very specialized tool, but if you put it in the right situations, it can be insane. But yeah, the F2000 for me is getting an A tier. The F2000 Tactical, woo! So this guy's got more customization, and that's about it. Same as the F2000, giving it an A tier. Now the AKS-74U. Right, so Soviet compact and fast to handle. Lightweight, you know, it feels great. And it's cheaper than 30 minutes on a night street in Stoke. And, I don't know, his hipfire is nice, I guess. Alright, so he is weak, he's using 5.45 rounds, of course, meaning it will not lay down folks quickly, right? Well, it will because a bullet is a bullet, but I mean more compared to the other guns, it's not putting them down as quick. It's got a short barrel too, so it's basically the same cons as the AKM, except it kind of just doesn't really redeem itself. You know, it's a shy don who sits in the back getting overshadowed by every other gun, especially his own kind, right? AKM, even the AK-74, right? It's just kind of there, like the middle child. For the same price and cheaper, you can find better options. I'd take some SMGs over this thing, man. But the main issue I have for this gun is how its recoil is so much higher than it's worth for the actual reward of, you know, like painting bullets around the dude that you're shooting at. You're doing too much, man. Dog's just overreacting, thinking he's sick, bro. Like, chill, man. It has got a nice fire rate, you know, it's customizable and it's decent at CQB, but there are just so many obvious better choices. So the AKS-74U is getting a C tier. Now the G3A3, the lockdown master, alright? This German behemoth is a superb choice if you need to hold angles, right? Since it's 7.62 rounds, it will blast dudes into the stratosphere. This thing is chunky as hell, right? It's basically running around with a tree trunk, alright? This fella's like the SKS, but more diverse and, better. He does reward patience though, you know, good aim, range discipline, everything like that. It also does have full auto, yet its recoil is equivalent of Jupiter slamming into you. That ain't recommended. It's also got a very low mag size, size, to be honest, so you'll need to pour your supply into this bad boy, right? It's unforgiving, slow and chunky, but if you learn him and get used to him, he'll slam foes into the ground, alright? He's a bit more of a specialized folk, but trust me, it's one of my favorite guns of all time, especially in Ready or Not. This boy, ooh, it has a different feel to him, right? But he certainly has his risks, so the G3A3 is getting an A tier. Now the QBZ03, this Chinese fella, is probably one of the easiest guns to control in full auto, making it far more practical than other guns in my opinion, right? This alongside its pinpoint accuracy makes it very, very strong for CQB and mid-range, which makes it better for aggressive playstyles with a very quick time to kill. Personally, that's how I play, a bit of a rabid idiot. Tactical gameplay? Nah. So overall, I think it's a very balanced and reliable gun. It's just as forgiving as other 5.56 rounds, but a bit more specialized in my opinion. Other than that, it's not as clinical as long range. In single fire, it's nothing special, but it's still a pretty good choice. So the QBZ03 gets an A tier. Now the QTS-11, right, by far definitely the most niche gun in this game, right? Overall, it's an odd Chinese gun using Chinese 5.8 rounds, which I'll be honest, I don't know much about, right? But I do know it feels underwhelming as a rifle, right? It's incredibly situational. The integrated explosive launcher is the most unique thing about it. Well, technically. I mean, you still need to drop another 3 supplies for the launcher, but oh yeah, it's for the demolition class only. If you pick rifleman or observer, then you're stuck with a smoke launcher. Boo. With the explosive, it can be useful in certain scenarios, sometimes, but on a consistent basis, it's very gimmicky. It's clunky, very expensive with poor value for what you actually get, and it's slow to handle. Additionally, the only unique thing of this gun can be placed on top of some of the better rifles as well. So it does feel like pissing away supply points. It's not completely useless, but it's bad majority of the time. I do have a little problem with the explosive launcher in this game as well. Sometimes you can be like pinpoint on top of the Don, blast, nothing happens to the fella. Super inconsistent. But yeah, it's incredibly situational. I see what they try to do with it, but no. I'm giving the QTS-11 a D tier. Now the foul, right? Buckle in for bias, alright? Since I use this Belgian bad boy in pretty much every other game it's available. So yes, it's a bit of an unforgiving gun, same as the G3A3. Strikingly hard to control. Its recoil's kind of insane. Its small mag and slow handling as well doesn't help. It's not exactly a plug and play gun. But if you can control this and play smart, then this beast is basically a one-shot monster. Very strong across all ranges with insane stopping power and accuracy, right? If you deploy this guy properly, it will dominate every single part of the game, especially if you learn it, since if you spot them first, then it's game over. Obviously, you need to not be a brainlet and miss your shot, but if you hit that shot, it's done, right? I love how it looks and sounds, man. It's an absolute beast. But as much as I love it, right, okay, it does have a clear weakness, like I mentioned before, which is why I'm giving the foul a high A tier. Now the M4A1, right? This gun is American perfection, right? The fire rate is rivaling some MGs. You know, barely any recoil on full auto. Incredibly versatile, fit for every situation. Super customizable, and overall one of the most consistent, reliable, and forgiving guns in the game. It's easy to use, but still maintains the same quality during all skill levels, right? Sure, it is expensive, but it's absolutely worth the supply points. There is no obvious weaknesses to it in my experience. If there was any gun in this game that defines S tier as cleanly as possible, this is one of them. So the M4A1 gets an S tier. Now the VHS-2. This Croatian beast is back-to-back with quality guns, but now it's a bullpup. You know, like I said, I love bullpups. Anyway, I can basically say the exact same thing I said with the M4A1, so look man, let's not beat around the bush, alright? Nearly perfect in every possible way. If you're a bullpup supporter, comment in the comments below. I love bullpups, and Sir Howard is the sexiest, biggest man I've ever seen in my life. I won't beat around the bush, like I said. The VHS-2 is an S tier as well, same reasons as the M4A1. Now the FAMAS F1. This French beauty, for one, you know, looks lovely. But in CQB, it does show a little bit of a rabid mean side, you know? This tears in CQB, right? This thing is built for aggressive play. It's got insane fire rate, and if you can control it, it's probably the best CQB weapon single-handedly designed for that situation, right? That does make it very specialized, though. It's not great for longer ranges, you know, being quite uncontrollable. Ammo does get swallowed instantly, and it is a wee bit costly. So, top tier for CQB, S tier I'll give it for that. But as an overall gun, it has got grey areas, therefore the FAMAS F1 gets an A tier. Now the NDR, other than being a laughing stock for the French, this American gun hits hard and with a surprisingly good fire rate for its caliber, making it very, very strong in CQB and mid-ranges, alongside being a more compact and manageable 7.62 rifle, compared to the FAL and the G3. However, of course, its recoil is still quite noticeable. The bullpup build, as much as I love them, does make it feel a little bit more sluggish in CQB, and it's not as accurate at range than other battle rifles. And the ammo economy is a little bit limited, and lastly, it is quite expensive, but it's still a very strong mix of power and usability for sure. So the MDR is getting an A tier. Now the WCX, this niche but solid fella, is pretty decent, close to mid-range performances, overall being quite controllable. It feels quite balanced, I must say. Overall, I found nothing special about it though, as if it doesn't want to cater to a specific niche. It's still solid, but basically gets overshadowed by a lot of this list, half of this damn list. It's got a gorgeous design though, I can't deny that. Yeah, it's still a solid gun, but it does get outshone for the others, in my opinion. So I'm giving the WCX a B tier for the same reasons as the other B tiers. Now the Mark 18 CQBR. Now you can get used to the homegrown all-American marks being fairly close to each other in the sense of it being absolutely unadulterated quality, right? And as you come to expect, it's similar to the M4A1, right? Same things going for it, except the Mark 18 is much more affordable and customizable. Now I don't want to regurgitate the same shit as I said with the M4A1, since there's not much difference between a lot of these guns stat-wise, and a very few rifles do actually outperform this crackhead on paper and in performance in game. A main pointer is its phenomenal accuracy, but man, it sounds sexy as hell. Same reasons as before, the Mark 18 gets an S tier. Now the Mark 17 MOD. Now this battle rifle mark, alongside with the MDR, is one of the most controllable battle rifles, right? Heavy damage, decent fire rate, and basically very versatile. It's less forgiving, noticeable recoil, and it requires you to lock in to use it to its full potential. It's very, very good, but has some fatal weaknesses. It can leave you exposed due to its mag size and handling, basically. So it's not as flawless as the Mark 18. So the Mark 17 gets an A tier. Now the Tavor 7. This expensive battle rifle hits pretty hard. I mean, at this point we know what 7.62 does to a person. It's accurate, high damage, versatile, and if you can control it, it's pretty noticeable recoil. Then it can be very consistent. This fella slimes in CQB, but again, being a bullpup makes it very bulky. Its mag ain't huge as well, considering its playstyle, which is a bit odd. Mostly, it's just another good pick. Tavor 7 gets an A tier. And now the Ace 52, right? The finale of the rifles, and this thing is a demon for CQB. And when I mean CQB, I mean VCQB, right? Because this thing's fire rate is actually ridiculous. Some people say quality over quantity, sometimes quantity is better than quality, alright? And despite that, it's surprisingly accurate. So as far as CQB rifles go, this is by far one of the most optimized. However, it is super expensive, like holy moly, man. It's naturally got a pretty steep fall off point coming to range, obviously, as well. Not so much damage wise, but certainly accuracy and velocity, right? And lastly, its ammo runs out insanely quick due to its mag size. It's not exactly the P90. If you take the plunge money wise and you need a gun that gets in there, then this Ace ladder is a very good pick, Use it right, then it delivers some of the most serious rip and tear in the game, alright? But like I said, extremely specialized for CQB, not optimized for anything else. So the Ace 52 is getting an A tier. Right, so the M870. This Thunder Blaster is pretty much the benchmark of shotguns, right? It's the cheapest choice, which you can't really go wrong with any shotgun unless it shoots piss. But yeah, it's what you come to expect, Your obvious obliteration in one shot alongside overall pretty consistent performance regarding its spread pattern. It doesn't spread as much as you and your nightly side hustle on OnlyFans.
You can't hide it from me.
Yeah, it's a good thing with this game's having its shotgun range pretty realistic. These guns are literally used for shooting birds in the sky out, but that's especially so with the M870. Its range is pretty good, especially with flechettes or slugs. You can slap many attachments on this and it'll handle like a pistol, right? Or well, the much needed loading grip for all the shotguns, Don't know if my govnik is walking around with 4 bandoliers, but yeah, for any pump action you'll definitely need that. Lastly is how accessible the shotgun is, being very cheap, allowing you to carry more than one singular grenade on your character. Overall, this handheld camel is pretty balanced. It genuinely doesn't have any glaring weaknesses stat-wise. As a shotgun, as I said before, the benchmark, hitting the criteria of what makes a shotgun good. There is one main and fatal drawback which curses some of the shotguns here though, which is obviously it being pump action. You need to be accurate, and if not, then you leave a fat frame to get headshotted by the inconsistent enemy AI. Seriously, these dudes are either Deadshot or Burton from Red Dead 2. Anyway, this isn't helped by its fairly limited ammo capacity, which which is regular for pump action, sure, but compared against the upcoming guns, this can be a risk. And again, you'll need that load and grip since this reload is slow as hell. But remember, Insurgency is trying to be realistic here, right? We're not Doomslayer where we can load 8 shells at once, alright? This is one at a time. So this ultimately means if you do decide to reload when you think you're safe, especially on outposts where shotguns benefit the most, it leaves you perfectly available to get dunked on. However, being shell-fed can actually be a benefit over mags, since you can always keep your shotgun topped up, unlike a mag which has to be switched. So overall, you gotta be good for your positioning, holding angles, choke points, defensive play, and punishing the AI like little cups, rather than pressing them like Doomslayer. It's an iconic goal for other shotguns, you know? If you die with this, it's most likely caused by the misuse of it, or you got dogged on over by reloading. But that being said, it's not the premium standard I'm looking for. Therefore, the M870 is getting a B tier. So the TOS 194, which we basically have the M870, but Russian. Seriously, there isn't really much of a difference between these two except the TOS is for the insurgents. So, bye-bye. It obviously has the exact same pros. If you land a shot, then it's 100% a kill. Equal spread pattern. In fact, this goes for all the shotguns, but they do have a little bit of wiggle room with their spread, meaning they aren't as unforgiving as people think. But anyway, it has the same range, attachments, both are cheap, blah blah blah. Once again, it's a standard issue as a shotgun gets, to be honest. I will say, I do prefer the iron sights on the TOS. It does look a little bit more lightweight, but they literally play the exact same, right? The stats are literally equal. This means all cons with the M870 carries over onto this fella. You know, sorry pal, but you should have been different. But yeah, once again, it's mainly a slow reload and obviously still pump action, meaning it's less forgiving if you do panic, which as usual is natural on outpost.
Or even frenzy.
Like I said, there's very little to differentiate the two. So once again, it's a good default standard, this time just for rebels. Really, this game could have done adding something a bit more unique like the spaz. It's another pump action, what can I say? Once again, if you die with this, it's likely due to missing or having to reload. So yeah, again, not the platinum standard I'm looking for, but still a good cheap choice. So the TOS 194 is getting a B tier. Now the KS-23, now this devilishly powerful shotty is a 4 gauge, right? And if you don't know how strong a 4 gauge is, well, let's just say if you land a shot or even an indirect one, then they are getting flung back 16 meters. Even if you hit them in the small toe, then they are still going down. Honestly, the best part of this gun is seeing the enemy's bodies ragdoll across the room with this kangaroo of a gun. Its range is also pretty decent considering, well, how stubby this guy is. You know, short King's Rise and all that. But yeah, it's shorter than previous, but it's still beneficial, you know, especially compared to the other video game shotguns like Call of Duty, where you can literally be inside someone and it will do 5 damage. Now what's that about, bro? Its penetration is also a little bit better natively, but if you slap slugs into this bad boy, then it's off the charts, alright? So this is the closest thing we're getting to a sawed-off double barrel, unfortunately. And to be fair, that's not off by a lot, since you only have 4 shells at a time, which, well, if you couldn't tell, isn't a lot. So obviously I was conning the TOS and the M870 for having only 8, but now you're limiting yourself to only half to essentially do the same job but funnier. This means if you do get overrun, which is often in this game, then you are rarely gonna outlast the round unless you're holding an angle. But not only that, but its spread does seem less clinical than the previous, which again does make a little bit of sense. This thing clearly was made to blast foes into the stratosphere in one shot, but alternately, rarely its spread can accidentally catch more than one fella at a time, which is caused by its insane damage. Once again, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But however, once again, memes aside, right? It's like the well rod, right? Obviously, it's not very good, but people still love it. I get it, man. It's fun. But I have to rank it fairly, alright? It comes into the same problems of being a pump shotgun, just even worse, alright? I cannot confide against how fun it is to use, obviously. Yet, I also cannot ignore the blatant and pretty fatal flaws in this gun. Once again, coming across a global issue of being caught while off guard while reloading. But now, you have to do so even more often, right? Or if your aim is ass, then you'll have to compromise even further. This isn't helped by its vastly heavier recoil as well. So despite how fun it is and how much of a hillbilly I feel, it's not very optimal, but obviously that one's up to you, whether which one's more important to you. But to this list, the KS-23 is getting a C tier. Now the KSG. Now this unique fella changes how shotguns play, well, compared to the last 3, because someone had the genius to attach a little bandolier on the shotguns itself, meaning you actually have 14 shells. Well, technically 8 in the shotgun itself, but you have more shells on the bastard, so it basically works the same way, meaning its need to reload is vastly reduced, the recoil is also massively reduced compared to the previous ones, and if you slap a slug into this fella, it becomes very, very good for mid-range. So this gun makes me feel like Pyro from Team Fortress 2 in his daydreams due to how laid back and chilled using this guy is, honestly. Even hipfire takes the piss. So far, this is the shotgun that is easiest to use, most quality of life, most versatile, with a fairly clinical spread once again, making it a very, very good choice, since it finally allows you to carry more than 2 kg of ammo, making it way better at holding angles, skirmishing, and basically being more forgiving for missing your shots and basically lets you stay in the fight for much, much longer. But it's still not my platinum standard. You may think I am a picky son of a bitch. I kind of am, but womp. Despite its obvious pros in comparison to the list, it still has its problems, which may be overshadowed by the final 2 horsemen on this list. And as you may have guessed, this comes back to being a pump action. So let me preface, pumps do have the benefit of always being able to top up your ammo, but due to how hectic this game is, the time to do so is so far in between, right? There's not 2 seconds where I'm not being bummed by 15 bombers. So compared to the risks of being jumped while reloading, missing your shots and getting dumped mid-cocking, or being completely overrun by enemies, it feels a bit more like a silver lining rather than a genuine advantage. So yes, again, its pump gives enemies a window to obliterate you. Usually shotguns have their advantage on first sight, right? If you flunk that shot, then it's usually GG's against a rifle. Well, unless you get one of those brain-dead AI. But the ammo count also isn't a full-blown positive, right? Nothing's truly black and white, of course. Say you get so overwhelmed that you blasted through 14 shells of ammo, right? Well, now you must sit there for a good couple of seconds to fill it up properly, which again isn't easy when you have a frog spawn amount of enemies charging you down. It's a fantastic gun to use, it's accurate, powerful and forgiving, although a little expensive, so as much as an improvement as it is so far, I count these risks as fatal, in which they have costed me once or twice. Therefore, it is still not my platinum standard. It's more so a gold standard, which is still not to be scoffed at whatsoever. So the KSG is getting a healthy A tier. Now the SK12. Bruh. Now we introduce the moment of technological advancement, alright? The automation of shotguns, well, semi, which is of course something that further evolves the shotgun. Making it long-lasting, faster, and still stay just as strong. So of course it's a semi-auto shotgun, making follow-up shots quicker, and additionally the issue of a window of opportunity after you flunk your first shot is no longer an issue. But additionally, and most importantly, is its mag size, right? Now default it only has 5 shells, which is pathetic, really. But if you're willing to indulge in putting your life savings onto the gun's attachments, you can add a drum mag, which gives you 20 whole shotgun shells, alright? 20. Interspersively, meaning you can spam these as you like, making clearing rooms much easier and deadly for the enemies, and basically just easy mode. Whereas your pump shotguns limit you to 50 rounds per minute, which, whether you're pressing hard or holding hard angles, this gun will mow them down, and still in just one shot. If you use point grip as well, it seems to spread quite a bit more, which can be beneficial in CQB, allowing you to basically play like an absolute idiot and still kill people. Don't ask how I know that. Thus, this is exactly what this gun was suited for, honestly. I mean, its mid-range is still surprisingly decent, but it's not as good as the other one since, you know, you're stuck with 12 gauge, no slugs or flechettes. And the last thing is its mobility, right? Massively helped by its rapid fire rate, meaning I can basically just fling myself out there like John Wick. I've had the best performances with this gun, and man, it's a shotgun, right? What else do I have to say? Rifles are cool and all, but nothing sounds better and feels better than a shotgun blasting someone's head like a watermelon, alright? Although, I must admit, I do prefer how pump actions feel. It just feels chunkier and... you know what I'm saying? But this gun is mostly a very aggressive gun, so you best be on your attacking game, alright? This thing basically is an SMG blasting 12 gauge. You can create piles and piles of bodies on this thing. But now, as I said, this thing is mag fed, which makes its reloading far less vulnerable. Even with a drum mag, it's still quicker than any previous gun. Now, it could be argued that tube fed shotties allow you to cancel out before reloading, whenever you need, which is true. However, the reload with the mags usually tend to be quick enough, but it's certainly something to keep in contention. But purely statistic wise, this gun is miles ahead of the others. Well, let me put some respect on the KSG, of course, but still, this gun breaks the one con so far, right? If you miss or reload, you might be cooked. But not with the SK12, right, ladies and gentlemen, because it gives you speed, ruthless pressure, forgiveness with how bad you are, and versatility, and it's still as powerful as the other ones anyway. So what's the miss? Obviously the main con with this is how expensive it is. That is a pretty big hit, but still, what more can I say other than I've found my platinum standard shotgun, alright? So here the SK12 gets an S tier from me. Now the US-12, right? This is a copycat of the DSK-12, but just South Korean. This is the exact same situation as the TOS versus M870, in which they're basically the exact same gun, but one's for security, one's for insurgency. So, in which this one's for the latter. So this one comes down to preference of situation, of course, but it's statistically the exact same. But one has a carry handle, so yeah. Of course, it's a semi-auto body piling machine, once again encouraging you to get in there and wipe the floor with them in CQB. But yeah, I won't beat around the bush, alright? It shares the same pros and cons and essentially a glorified reskin, alright? It does have a slightly better iron sight though, but yeah, it does come back to feel. You can still get the same amount of insane kills and hold points down with this fella, alright? It doesn't feel any different in my opinion. The US-12 gets slapped into the S tier, once again being the platinum standard in Insurgency Sandstorm. Man, I hope they had more guns, man, because there's so many I love shotguns, and there's so many that they could add. But me and you know how many updates this game gets. Alright, we got the Sterling. Now this bad boy is one of those guns that genuinely surprised me going into it, because I mean, just look at the fella. This thing looks like the steel pipe next to your toilet bowl. But I'll be honest, right, the Sterling can actually be pretty good. You gotta use it right, for sure. The biggest thing that the Sterling has going for it is that it's ridiculously cheap, right, at one supply point, which means after you bought it, you've still got enough supply points to decorate your loadout like a Christmas tree.
It's about to go critical.
And despite looking like it was manufactured in someone's shed, it's surprisingly controllable. The recoil is super tame, meaning you can keep shots on target without your gun trying to escape from your hand. This thing is very, very forgiving. Sure, the caliber is kind of weak, alright? But a bullet to the head is still a bullet to the head, goddammit. Now here's the thing that people don't really like about it, is the fire rate. It's not exactly mental. You're not wielding a handheld portable accelerator here, alright? It shoots at a pretty slow pace, and because of that, it doesn't absolutely evaporate people the way that some higher tier SMGs do. It's not flashy, it's not exciting, but it is dependable. Right, this Donkan does need to hit headshots, I won't be honest. But with how controllable it is, getting them isn't exactly difficult. Otherwise, it will take 3 to 5 bullets to put someone down in the chest. The cherry on top is a fat extended mag, alright? 50 rounds of controlled fire can delete everything if you're precise enough. Despite being an absolute abomination, it actually has quite a few attachments, and compared to a lot of the SMGs, it's surprisingly controllable at mid to even long range. Look, if you slap a suppressor on this, then you basically become a Black Knife assassin, well, just with a Sterling. You can sit in a hallway and hold angles for ages. This thing's fire rate makes the ammo economy feel like a protein bar. Sure, the elephant in the room, yes. There are absolutely situations in CQB where you get outgunned by, well, nearly everything. So I do understand why people don't love it, but you gotta give credits where it's due. It's not nearly as bad as people say it is. Now, the slow rate of fire is kind of a double-edged blade, right? It makes the time to kill slower, sure, but it also does make the gun easier to control and easier to manage. So yeah, the Sterling has to be played a bit more carefully than the run and gunners. But if you're clinical with headshots and upper body shots, it's actually pretty good. This is kind of the theme of the weapon, right? The fella doesn't feel incredible, but it doesn't feel bad. The Sterling can absolutely handle itself. There's been some crazy situations where there's like a line of enemies, and if I line myself just right, I am knocking every single one down. But that said, on the other side of it, I can turn a corner and some dude with an AK-74 will absolutely put my ass into the ground. So the issue is that once you start comparing it to the really, really scary SMGs, the cracks do begin to show. The top dogs kill faster, handle better, or simply bring more to the table. It's like the footballer who got a solid 7 out of every match, you know? Not every weapon needs to be some cracked out monster fueled by cocaine. Sometimes you just want a gun that's affordable, controllable, and consistently effective, and the Sterling absolutely delivers on that. So yeah, the Sterling lands comfortably in a low B tier for me. Now this little grease gun, alright? This is like your Sterling if you're willing to trade ammo capacity for a slightly stronger caliber. Now the grease gun is one of those weapons that looks so unbelievably rubbish that somehow it loops back into being cool again, right? Seriously, this thing looks less like a military firearm and more something like a mechanic forgotten his toolbox after fixing a Ford Transit.
Skip. But when does this game get f***ing good?
But here's where the fun starts, right? It's when you fire it, okay? This thing sounds ridiculous. But this thing shoots so slowly and it sounds so ridiculous that it genuinely sounds like it's inspected every single bullet before it leaves the barrel. Now, normally when I see an SMG with a fire rate this slow, alarm bells do start ringing in my head. Usually, slow fire rate means you're about to enter a gunfight with all the lethality of a rolled up newspaper. But the grease gun actually does get away with it. The recoil on this thing is absolutely laughable, right? There's basically none. There is no recoil. The thing behaves more like a paintball gun than a firearm. And because of that, landing shots feel ridiculously easy, right? You can stay on target, conserve ammo, and consistently hit center mass without needing the wrist strength of a forklift. It feels incredibly comfortable to use. It's very similar to the Sterling, just with, again, a slightly stronger caliber. Sure, most SMGs are about speed, you know, you run into a room, dump half a magazine, paint the walls red and move on. But the grease gun really doesn't play that game. If you slap a suppressor on this fella, it becomes a close to mid-range stealth demon. There's no extended mag flow, but you have still got 30 rounds natively. Honestly, for 2 supply, you can't really complain that much about it. Now, obviously, the slow fire rate can absolutely get you into trouble. Like I said with the Sterling, if 2 enemies appear at once and both of them have weapons that fire faster than a continental drift, you're gonna start sweating, right? Missing shots feel especially painful because every round matters far more than it does for something like the MP5 or even the MP7. So you don't really get to panic with the grease gun. You're not gun-ho with this dude. The grease gun kind of punishes your panic. But if you can actually hit your shots, this thing becomes surprisingly effective. It is dependable, accurate, and surprisingly capable in the right hands. But most importantly, it's very cheap. Like the Sterling, it's a bit of a headshot monster because the recoil is partially non-existent. Look, it is held back from being an A tier since that sluggish fire rate and lack of versatility in chaotic situations can really mess you up. But it's still way too effective and way too reliable to fall any lower. And like I said, for the last time, for something this cheap, you can't really complain that much about it. And I do think it's better than the Sterling because it simply puts enemies down a little bit quicker. It's got a slightly bit tighter time to kill. So this greasy chud is getting a B tier from me. Right, the Uzi. This BTEC Sterling, the BTEC MP5A2, the BTEC MP5A5, the BTEC MP7. Hang on. Right, look, Insurgency is a game where even a weak gun can still be used, but this thing definitely gets outperformed by, well, pretty much everything. But I do honestly have respect for people who use it for the drip, but optimality-wise, spoiler alert, almost any other SMG would do. The Uzi is a close-range bullet hose that can shred up close, right? But its recoil and lack of refinement holds it back hard. This thing is unwieldy as a cheap Wrangler going 70 miles per hour. Now, the Uzi is probably one of the most famous SMGs ever made. Even if you've never touched a gun game in your life, you probably have seen this thing somewhere before. You know, what I'm trying to say is this gun is an icon. Everyone loves it. Unfortunately, being an icon, though, doesn't automatically make it good. But when it comes to actually using it, the whole experience kind of felt like a bit of a handicap. The amount of work you got to put into this bloke to make it as viable as literally any other SMG is mind-splitting, right? If only I could akimbo these things to enhance the cool factor at least. This game's already added a Desert Eagle and a 50 cal, why not? Look, the Uzi does have a good fire rate, you know, it's got quite a few modern attachments and can go from a 25 rounds all the way to a 50 round drum mag. That is expensive as hell, but that's actually really good. The caliber is the same as the Sterling, however, you know, the damage isn't anything special. If you're not tapping headshots, it will take 3 to 5 bullets to kill someone. And unlike the grease gun, it kind of doesn't really make up for anything else elsewhere. You know, my biggest gripe with this gun is its accuracy and its damage fall off, right? With an SMG, you're obviously going to run full auto in CQB, but man, this thing really has to be in CQB. Even at mid-range, it struggles to put people down in full auto, and at long range, you've literally got a better chance of throwing a rock into space. And the recoil does feel weird as hell, right? And 25 rounds isn't exactly generous, unless you've got a real human centipede of idiots lined up for you. One mag only goes so far, so you're kind of forced to dip your toes into some extended mags at least to make it truly beneficial. It's kind of limited into CQB, and if you want to do mid-range to long range, you're going to have to do single fire, and who the hell wants to use single fire on an Uzi? I'm not trying to say the Uzi is completely useless. Look, if I was, then this thing would suck ass in close quarters too, but it absolutely does not. Inside buildings, this thing can absolutely shred, right? Its hip fire is super controllable and solid. It's compact, very quick to handle, and can absolutely clear rooms when you're fighting up close. Now, the problem is that almost every single time I try to use it, it feels like I'm fighting the gun as much as I'm fighting the enemy. The recoil on paper isn't horrific, but it isn't pleasant either, right? Especially compared to the Sterling or the grease gun. It's one of those weapons where the recoil feels more volatile than rewarding. There's this weird bounce to it that makes sustained fire awkward once the targets start moving. It's like you can't really see the dudes unless you're using a horrible chunky sight on it. No! Compared to the other smoother SMGs in the category, it just does feel a bit rough around the edges. And now lastly, you've got the damage output. Alright, well, should I say the lack of damage output unless you're practically nose deep into the enemy's arse. The Uzi doesn't really hit particularly hard. And in a game like Insurgency, being average is a bit of a dangerous place to be because you are getting absolutely overwhelmed with quality, especially when it costs the same as a grease gun and more than the Sterling. I don't really see the point in that. My point is that you got to put a little bit more extra work into this gun to make it near as viable reliable as previous ones. But here's the thing, unlike the Sterling or the Grease gun, I don't really feel like the Uzi is giving me the same consistency in return. It's cheap. Look, most of the time I'd rather spend one extra point and step into the MP5 territory as well. So the Uzi is landing at a C tier for me. Right, the MP5A2, righty. Right, so the MP5A2 is one of the most reliable and forgiving SMGs in Insurgency Sandstorm. You basically just get a direct upgrade. And sure, it doesn't have any absurd extremes of the P90 or the Vector, but it performs well in pretty much, well, every single close mid-range fight. And for the price, you get a lot of value, which is probably why many people pick it. Now, the MP5A2 is one of those guns that really doesn't need an introduction. This thing has been carrying counter-terrorist units, special forces, and of course, world-renowned British police. Right, the MP5 is basically the Toyota Corolla of SMGs. And what's funny is that on paper, the MP5 doesn't actually look that crazy, right? It doesn't have the highest fire rate, it doesn't have the biggest magazine, and it doesn't hit like a freight train. But the second you start using it, it just feels good, man. The recoil on this thing is absolutely gorgeous. I've genuinely fought shopping trolleys that were harder to control. You point the gun where you want the bullet to go, and then through some ancient German witchcraft, the bullet actually goes there. I know, revolutionary stuff. You should take some notes, little Uzi. Its accuracy and ergonomics is fantastic. And you really don't have to wrestle with a gun, alright? That's a huge advantage in my book. Insurgency is a game where half your deaths happen because a bloke appeared from absolutely nowhere and gave you roughly 0.4 seconds to react. And in those situations, you need a gun that responds exactly how you expect it to. No rabid recoil, that can be absolutely game-changing. And the MP5 does that every single time. The fire rate sits in that sweet spot where it's fast enough to shred people up close without chewing through ammo like a starving XL bully called Cupcake. And because it's so easy to use, the MP5A2 ends up being one of the most versatile SMGs in the category. It just works. And especially being a more modern weapon, it's got some absolutely lovely attachments on it, right? It's fast, forgiving and versatile, excelling in close to mid-range combat. And with an extended mag, you have a very, very healthy 40 rounds. Some guns are viable when everything goes right, but the MP5A2 is viable because things don't need to go right. Now, I don't think it quite reaches S tier because there are quite a few SMGs that do push things a little further. But for the price of free supply, you do get a ton. You know, in a game as chaotic as Insurgency, that kind of reliability is worth its weight in gold. German engineering at its near finest. So the MP5A2 comfortably lands in an A tier for me. Now, the MP5A5 is basically the premium version of the MP5. It's got the same reliable handling as the A2, but with small improvements that make it one of the most strongest all-around SMGs in the game. It's by far one of the safest, most consistent picks you can possibly run. You know, at first glance, you're probably thinking, man, it's the same gun, mate. And, well, yeah, fair enough. These two are as closely as related as Godric the Grafted is and Prince Andrew are. But after enough time with them, you start to notice the A5 just feels a little bit more refined, you know, a little smoother, more controlled. It's kind of like a regen of Zlatan Ibrahimovic in career mode. And in the same fashion as recoil, it's absolutely beautiful. This thing shoots so smoothly that you genuinely start wondering if the bullets even weigh anything. Great accuracy, great fire rate, and very forgiving. And that's where the MP family shines, really. Consistency. You can have all the damage, all the fire rate in the world, but if your gun behaves like a crackhead when you hold the trigger, it kind of really doesn't matter. So the MP5A5 doesn't really ever have that problem. And what I really like about this gun is how versatile it is. Some SMGs are special, either close range monsters or awkward hybrids, but the MP5A5 sits in right in that middle while still excelling in its little situations. Attachments are solid and modern as well. 40 round extended, 30 native mags, suppressors, underbarrels, optics, everything you need. The reason I rank it above the MP5 is pretty simple. You know, every time I use both, I just end up preferring the A5. It just feels a bit more of a complete package. This thing is the most German thing ever. Well, I guess other than Lederhosen. You know, it takes everything people love about the MP5 platform and polishes it into one of the most dependable SMGs in the game. The MP5A5 lands in a high A tier, so very close to the S tier it hurts. Right, this little bad boy MP7, right? The MP7 is one of the strongest SMGs in Insurgency Sandstorm, right? Straight up, because it combines absurd close-range lethality with surprising control and armor penetration, right? It's one of the few SMGs that genuinely feels oppressive when used well. And yeah, look, it's expensive at 8 supply with a 40-round extended mag. Honestly, that's a price I'd happily pay over and over again. This thing is a personal insult directed to anyone standard within 50 meters of you, right? 40 rounds going that quickly is genuinely mind-boggling. alright? At that point, caliber doesn't even matter anymore. Honestly, the fire rate is absolutely mental. Despite firing at the speed of light, the recoil is ridiculously manageable. This is always a good thing about SMGs. Having so much bullets that can fire so quickly and having minimal recoil, it can be insane, right? But this thing doesn't kick nearly as much as you would expect. Well, I mean, look at the size of it. You can stay on target and vaporize people before they even really process what happened. And at close range, you're an absolute nightmare. It clears rooms so effectively, it's laughable. It's basically the perfect CQP SMG. At longer ranges, sure, you're still working with a small caliber like every other SMG, but the MP7 gets closer than it has any right to. That's with its ergonomics, handling, and just size being so compact and quick, bro. Usually SMGs force a small compromise, you know, either fire rate, recoil, damage, or versatility, but the MP7 kind of just stacks its best bits together into one compact demon. This is the building CQB SMG. If your goal is to win gunfights, clear objectives, and delete people in close to mid-range, the MP7 is one of the easiest picks in the game. Absolutely worth its price. And the scary part is, it doesn't really require loads of skill to get value, you know? It's just excellence stacked on top of excellence. Fast, forgiving, incredibly lethal, and effective in almost every SMG situation. So yeah, the MP7 comfortably lands in an S tier for me. Right, the P90. Do I really need to cover this? The P90 is one of the most dominant SMGs in, well, every single game it's ever been included in, because it removes one of the biggest SMG weaknesses, right? Magazine limitations. With a huge capacity natively, high RPM, and strong penetration, it becomes an absolute monster in aggressive play. Alright, the bullpup layout, the top-mounted mag, plastic lunchbox ergonomics, and somehow it's one of the most terrifying weapons in the SMG category, and really just kind of in the gun world. This thing is just an absolute menace. The first thing everyone obviously talks about is a magazine. 50 rounds. 50. A lot of SMGs either shoot too quick and have to reload so often because the mag isn't big enough, or they shoot so slow that the mag feels like they last forever. The P90 pins a nail in the coffin with an RPM of 857 and makes every bullet count but still lasts so long. And that's one of the biggest reasons this gun is so strong, right? Most close range fights in Sandstorm are either won by whoever lands the shot first. The P90 strategy is pretty simple, you know? Just keep shooting until the entire postcode becomes unsafe. You miss 10 rounds, who cares, right? Miss 20, you still got 30. And when you combine that magazine with a fire rate, things just get absolutely silly. Normally this level of fire and ammo would mean awful recoil, but not here. It's surprisingly controllable, so you can still keep the stream of bullets in target without fighting the weapon. And that makes it one of the most forgiving guns in this game as well. You don't need perfect accuracy, you can literally just overwhelm people through pure volume. Right? Attachments are decent, but I'll be honest, it does get expensive really quick. Unlike niche SMGs, the P90 feels incredible in pretty much every single situation you'll realistically be using one, right? Fire rate, magazine size, forgiveness, effectiveness, it's all absurd. It's an absolutely shameless weapon and I love it for that. So yeah, look, the P90 comfortably sits in an S tier, top of the list so far. Now the Vector. The Vector is the definition of extreme specialization, alright? Ridiculous close range deletion power, but clear limitations outside of that, right? It absolutely melts people indoors, but it's not as universally strong as some of the S tier SMGs. So let me cut the cookie a little bit. Now obviously the fire rate for the Vector is absolutely baffling. 1200 RPM. I thought I misread that when I first saw this, but holy moly, bro, it's insane fire rate. The Vector has a fire rate that it feels like it's tearing the fabric of space and time, mate. Shooting this thing for 2 seconds, your entire mag is gone. It's highly expensive though, like, damn. But yeah, look, it absolutely obliterates enemies, what can I say? The time to kill is stupid. Alright, close range, you win, basically. Medium range, you still win, but it is a little less fluid. That's because that's a trade-off, right? This thing is kind of built like a handheld race car with a fuel tank the size of a yogurt pot. The magazine is tiny and you do feel it consistently. You don't spray this dude. If you miss your spray, then that's a whole mag gun because it's only got 25 rounds. That kind of does hurt the point of its fire rate being so high. But that said, if you do hit, then you've just deleted a man in 0.3 seconds. And I will say its extended mag is a scam. 2 extra supply for, wow, 5 whole extra rounds. How generous. Ammo economy for this gun is a genuine joke. And the reloads are just as dramatic. You'll be reloading so often. I hope you bring a plate carrier. But the thing I want to talk about most with this thing is its recoil, right? It's so peculiar. It has 0 vertical recoil, but a little horizontal recoil, which is, well, good, but it feels mad weird, bro. Like, it just slightly moves to the side, which is still a net positive. You just gotta get used to it. It just feels really weird. This must be how mouse players feel. When the Vector works, it dominates. With good positioning and trigger discipline, you can absolutely shred multiple enemies before they even realize you've entered the building. It does punish hesitation penetration and missing them. It's not forgiving. The small magazine and high commitment playstyle, alongside being very expensive, mean mistakes are punished instantly. You overextend, miss shots, or even get caught mid-reload and you're done. The MP7 and the P90 are oppressive in a flexible, versatile way, but the Vector is oppressive in a specialized way. It's an incredibly paralleled gun. It's good for one thing. So yeah, the Vector easily sits in an A tier for me. Now the Honey Badger. Now this fella sits in a really weird grey area in video games. You know, it's not really an SMG and, well, no, it's not a Honey Badger. It's technically a PDW chambered into 300 Blackout. Most games, including Sandstorm by virtue of the Breacher class, basically treat it like an SMG because, well, it's compact and fast. Keep that in mind, blame the game, argue with a wall. Right? It hits harder than most SMGs, close to mid-range power, and it gives you that rifle-like lethality with breacher mobility. It sounds pretty good, right? This dude does have better velocity, penetration, and range compared to, well, pretty much any other true form SMG. The first thing you'll notice is how clean it is. It's suppressed by default, so you'll be running around like Gabriel Logan. Your shots are quiet, enemies don't really notice that they've been killed until, well, I guess they won't. And then on top of this thing actually hits pretty hard. The 300 Blackout damage is genuinely no joke. Look, it's expensive, but you're not tickling people at range like some of the SMGs. Combined with, well, somewhat controllable recoil, not true SMG laser beam level, but stable enough that you'll never really be fighting the weapon. You could say that fight a little bit further while still shredding up close. And that's where the danger starts, right? Because it makes your ideas get above your station. You still can't be too hyper aggressive. It's kind of deceptive. At long ranges, you'll still struggle to fire it unless it's in single fire. And well, this is an SMG list. Who the hell wants to shoot an SMG in single fire? You won't outburst the Vector or outpressure a P90. And that's kind of the Honey Badger, you know? It's kind of a multitasker. A jack of all trade. It simply doesn't dominate any single area. The MP7 is faster, the P90 is more oppressive, the Vector's more explosive up close, and the Honey Badger is just slightly less extreme in every direction. It's not as forgiving though, it's not a spray and pray gun. There's less bullets here, so it doesn't completely pin down fully in CQB. I will say this thing does play as a better SMG than it does a rifle though. The Honey Badger sits firmly in an A tier for me. Right, the AS Val. It's technically a suppressed rifle slash carbine more than a true SMG. It's in the Breacher class, it plays like an SMG according to the game. Spoiler alert, it's one of the strongest weapons in that role. The AS Val is brutally effective because it combines rifle level lethality with SMG like aggression. This thing is a true hybrid, and like I said with the Honey Badger, this is a better SMG than it is a rifle. It's got a fast time to kill, built-in suppressor, strong penetration and velocity, and excellent close range dominance, making it one of the nastiest, sneakiest guns in the game. Again though, you'll still be dropping your life savings on it. Look, it's expensive. This thing is so good at stealth play though, especially on dark maps, right? I feel cool as hell using this. You will be taking dudes quicker than they can say to Hoddock. The AS Val's dominance basically is beating most guns to the fight before literally anything else. The first thing you'll notice is its silence. Obviously it's suppressed by default, which I will say it technically saves you money, I guess. This thing has me feeling like Strelok after he downs 18 Cossack vodkas. Absolutely undefeatable and borderline insane. You hold an angle and then someone pops around the corner and then that's it. No fight, no exchange. Just a quiet tap, 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 and then they're gone. It's kind of actually insulting how calmly this weapon kills people. Like, give them a chance. Now let's talk damage. This thing hits like it has a personal resentment towards anyone opposing it. The time to kill up close is disgusting. And even at ranges where most SMGs start falling off, the AS Val confidently ends those fights. This does mean you can actually push it a wee bit further than even the Honey Badger can. Look, the AS Val, it really is quite versatile. Combine that with its fire rate and you've got a weapon that ends gunfights quick. Really, before they even start. It's better for armored enemies too. With strong penetration and velocity, it carries further than it has any right to. You're not just killing people in rooms, right? You're deleting people behind cover, through angles, through the buddies used as meat shields. Look, the recoil isn't exactly MP7 level, but it kind of barely matters in practice unless the fights go on a bit longer than 4 seconds. Most fights end before the gun even has chance to misbehave. That said, its ammo count isn't the highest, meaning it does run out quite quickly. Kind of a Vector situation. You won't be going gun-ho with this fella. Its attachments are decent. Obviously, you already have an integral suppressor as well. There is no other SMG that has this raw power while being suppressed. Sure, it is up to your playstyle. If you like sprinting around, blasting bullets into every hallway, then, well, fair enough, I respect it. And look, it's not completely flawless. As said, the magazine is small, and if you miss a shot or drag fights out, you'll run into that ammo issue being a big problem, right? And don't try to push it past mid-range, otherwise it will become as useless as the MP7 is at it. But, like I said, with the ammo problem, you gotta be more clinical for sure. You will be reloading a lot, which is why I don't think it's the absolute best of the best for SMGs. So yeah, the AS Val is getting a low S tier from me. Now, first off, the Makarov. As Soviet as it gets, really. You know, this deaky fella is as economically safe as it gets. It's completely free. Makarov for you, and a Makarov for you. Makarov from everybody. Kruda! It's also super lightweight. You know, there are literally pens out there that weigh more than this thing. So that does make it a decent tool for emergencies when you're getting bum rushed by the population of Afghanistan and run out of ammo, which is really the main reason you're going to be using a pistol in this game. So we can tick off the box that it does what it's meant to do. It absolutely can be lethal up close, as long as you land them, obviously, and overall it's very easy to control. Just point and boom and pew pew pew, then they're dead. But as you expect, nothing in this world that is free is fantastic. Its damage is incredibly low, well, compared to other pistols in the game. It can get the job done, but you ain't got a lot to work with, especially with just 8 bullets, and only 10 with an extended mag. Like I said, this fella is your economic get out of free jail card. It ain't that good at range, or really anything more than just a toenail away. It has its uses, and it checks the boxes to the bare minimum, but it is heavily limited, as you may come to expect. So we gotta let the guy off, man, you know? It's been rough out here for him, he's broke. So the Makarov is getting a C tier. Now the Browning High Power! Now for being so cheap, it comes as a big reward that this magazine is pretty lovely at 13, even 20 with a Viagra pill. So this will naturally give the Belgian, Mr. Browning, more longevity. Performance-wise, this is your jack of all trades, decent damage, controlled recoil, and pretty solid handling. So all in all, it's a pretty balanced pistol. This does mean against tougher armor, it'll take a little bit more, and in a game where it's basically stat-based, the Browning does sit on the fence a little bit. It doesn't exactly excel at anything, but he's kind of the chap that got all C's in his exams, right? Once again, he'll tick the box and do the job as should, better than the Makarov, but doesn't excel in anything else. So he's a cheap, safe, balanced choice that does get outperformed, but it's still a good choice. So the Browning High Power gets a B tier from me. Now the Tariq. Now this Orochi is a copycat of the Beretta M1951. It boasts a little bit more penetration and velocity than low expense pistols like the Makarov, and surprisingly the Browning High Power, which, you know, we may need to sue for misleading advertising, which this basically means it will drop quicker than the previous guns. It is dirt cheap at 1 supply, and overall its controllability is very good. You know, there's no Rabbit-Chewini movements around here, habibi. However, the recoil is a tad bit more noticeable than the other previous cheap pistols, but you kind of come to expect that. It's a fair trade-off in my opinion. It does have the same issues as the Makarov, you know, low ammo, limited to close quarters, and does get outclassed by upcoming fellas. So this does fill the same role as the Makarov, being a cheap emergency lifeline for CQB. But instead this one will put them down much quicker. You know, it's a little bit more specialized, but also is still very situational. So the Tariq is getting a B tier. Now the L106A1. Now this angry German fella boasts even harder penetration. But his damage will drop pretty much any other light armored folk up close, you know? Its stopping power is undeniably invigorating. Something so satisfying about popping a rebel's head into fragments with a twitch of my finger. In the game, of course. It does feel very consistent with its recoil and accuracy too, you know, 100%. There's no random jerks or absurd recoil around this gun, but most importantly, it is its fat magazine with 15 whole rounds, you know, with 20 if you dip your feet into one more supply for an extended mag. That is fantastic. That said, the gun does cost 2, which isn't absurd, so we are hiking up the price a little bit, but I think it's so worth it for this one. With its ammo, this does overall make it quite forgiving if you do miss your shots, like me. Trust me, guys, I'm I'm trying. However, this is another do-it-all gun, right? Not one that kind of specializes, making it a great balanced gun with no specific edge, since this gun's kind of just made for the panic situations where you need to get rid of the bombers right now. But it is still one of the best balanced jack-of-all-trades guns in the game. So the L106A1 gets a high A tier from me. Now the well rod, right, okay, well, trust us Brits to make the most backward, strange, back-of-the-shed guns in the game, of course. You know, it was produced in Birmingham, now it kind of makes sense of why it came out like this. I mean, if I was from Birmingham, I probably wouldn't come out the same even. Anyway, this is the only integrally suppressed pistol in the game, making it ideal for stealth, naturally, allowing you to essentially ambush targets and get off a good hit. You know, another thing I like doing in this game is making the most cursed creations possible, and this gun certainly fills that brief, because what am I even looking at, man? But other than that, that's kind of in for the pros, so buckle in. First off, it's bolt action, making it incredibly slow to fire, making fighting groups a headache, and well, of course, the possibility of you missing could be fatal. It's also got a tiny ass mag at 6, which cannot be increased, and as you come to expect, it's shitty to open fights. You know, it's incredibly situational and takes quite a bit of skill to land a good shot. It usually has to be a headshot. If you hit the body, most of the time, you need 2 shots to get them off. So the Brummie isn't absolutely useless, don't get me wrong, but it's highly situational, with you having to do a lot of work to get there. You know, it's clearly one of the worst pistols for general play. So this absolute freak gets a D tier from me. Now the M1911, America! The classic iconic all-American pistol that I'm sure needs no introduction. You know, this beast uses fat 45 ACP rounds, meaning it will lay people down flat, right? Not breathing, never to recover, dead forever. You know, this makes it great against armors too. Well, I mean, normal game armors. I'm not on about the chankers in frenzy mode. These guys are just ridiculous, honestly. You know, it's a consistent killing machine that is easy to handle with really good accuracy, basically just overall reliable. Now we're getting into the more specialized guns where you can essentially use this to pick off quite a few people, of course, if your aim's good. But all that power does obviously come with drawbacks, you know, with only 7 bullets in the mag and only 10 with an extended one. Due to its lack of ammo and follow-up shots, this can get you absolutely bummed in gank fights alongside you not being critical. I just shoved a nuke up my pussy. See ya. Making it have a pretty sizable margin for error. But of course, if you're absolutely cracked at this game, then that isn't really an issue. So this chambered bald eagle is built to end a fight instantly, right? If you have a bunch of dudes running towards you, whip out your American sidearm and then pum pum pum, usually one shot's enough to put them down, making it a pretty good emergency tool. But once again, I must batter this home as long as you hit your shots, right? So with good aim, it makes it one of the strongest pistols in the game, obviously damage-wise. Yet not being too heavily chambered that is unwieldy, as we'll get into later. It is held back by its incy mag, in my opinion, being quite a decent margin for error, you know, considering how many enemies you come across in this game. Noted, I'm a co-op player because I don't like people. You come across a lot of enemies, so really, if you do run out of ammo in your primary and you're whipping this out, it's not going to last you that long. But if you need it in a snip, like a lot of these high-power pistols, it would absolutely do the job. But alongside that, if you do panic, then it's pretty much GG's. But even so, the M1911 gets an A tier from me. Now the M45A1, here we have the new gen 1911, right? You know, it carries all the pros of the 1911, you know, great damage and penetration, strong against armors and, well, skulls. You know, it's manageable and solid recoil handling, and that's because it's basically the same weapon in game, right? It plays the same. The only difference is the 1911 is for the insurgents, and the M4A1 is for security. With minuscule changes, like the M45's iron sight's being a tad bit better, and the recoil is ever so slightly better. But yeah, let's not beat around the bush, right? It's pretty much the same gun, just modernized. So, same pros and cons. The M45A1 gets an A tier, just ahead of the 1911. Now the Beretta M9. Now we go back to the forgiving guns that allow you to spray and pray, yet slightly less damaging pistols. You know, this American Honey Badger is extremely forgivable since it's got 15 rounds and 20 with an extended mag. It's got basically minuscule recoil, making its follow-up shots mad easy, right? This also gets benefited with the big mag sizes as well. You know, I also think it's a very easy to handle gun, meaning it's very beginner friendly since the guy does work well in pretty much a lot of scenarios, you know, CQB, ambushes, mid-range, holding angles, etc. However, we are back at lower caliber, meaning it won't stop folk dead in their tracks. So if you value a mag over raw power, then this is the other side of the pond for that. By far one of the best all-around pistols, similar to the L106A1. So the M9 is getting an A tier as well. Now the PF940, this rabid American, once again, is starting to get into a little bit of a pricey territory, but I think it earns its spot. Now, as said before with the M9 and the L106A1, it's super accurate, forgiving, great follow-up shots, but oh no, its caliber isn't very strong. Well, that doesn't matter, alright? Because its erratic bastard has 17 rounds, which natively is a great size, but if you just want to dip just one more supply, then you can have 31 goddamn rounds. 31. And then this thing essentially acts like a semi-auto SMG, alright? This attachment is game-changing for this thing. It makes everything I just said enhanced. Gank fights are laughable now, and that damage issue, you know, it doesn't matter anymore since you just overwhelm them with bullets and still have enough for the next raid of the population of Oman. So for me, the PF940 is the best pistol in the game, by far, honestly. I can't think of an argument that knocks it down. It covers most categories and bastardizes the flow with its potential, meaning its mag, essentially. This is a beast, absolutely is worth the points, as long as you're willing to dip into it, obviously. So the PF940 is getting an easy S tier from me. Now the MR74. Now, I am biased because, I mean, who doesn't like revolvers? But anyway, this French powerhouse obviously blows holes into people. If you land shots, then it's GG's, you know? Meaning, for whatever reason, you're in a duel, aka just fighting a few dudes who are sprinting head on to you, this will put them down. And also, due to its velocity, it's far better at ranges as well compared to the other guns. That's without its spectacularly cursed loadout customization. This is by far one of the most insanely wrong pistols to customize. I mean, look at this. I'm Han Solo.
This is Han Solo.
Yep, I love it for this. It is mad expensive though, but I can't complain about a sniper the size of a Nintendo Switch, alright? But anyway, let's state the obvious. If your aim isn't on point, then womp, you've only got 6 bullets to make it count. You know, the reload is mad slow too. You do have a speed loader, which is quite quick, but you do have to dump all your ammo anyway, so this can leave you in very, very compromising positions. This has caught me too many times. It's got slow follow-ups and basically no forgiveness in hectic fights. You have to be on your game if you want this thing to work. But look, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fun. So the MR7 gets a B tier from me. And now finally the Desert Eagle. I mean, I seriously don't have to say anything about its damage, right? This is the hardest hitting pistol in the game, and even, well, some of the mainline guns. If you hit your shots, then congrats. They are red mist. I wouldn't worry about your broken wrist too much though. But anyway, it drops anything, and it's quite good at long range. Same as a revolver, yeah, it doesn't have the same pinpoint accuracy as the MR, and its attachments are not really going to help you, so you need to be quite cracked to actually land these shots. But it's completely possible. It is super expensive though, to the point where you're literally never going to use this as a genuine sidearm. But it suffers from the exact same issues as the revolver, just it has one more round. Especially follow-up shots ain't easy at all to pull off. So as I said, if you miss or get swamped, then it's GG's. However, I will make an argument for the revolver. It at least canters itself to being played a lot more clinically. You can literally play it as a little sniper. However, the Deagle has extremely uncontrollable recoil that tilts to the right ever so slightly, making follow-up shots virtually impossible unless you just guess. Unlike the revolver, where you can at least have some distance in between you, or just at least keep your sights on them. When you fire the Deagle, you don't even know where the hell the guy's gone because it's so fucking big in your hand. So it does get the benefit of being mag-fed. However, it kind of doesn't matter since you'll be taking pauses to shoot this beast anyway. You know, follow-up shots are so hard for this thing, I found. You know, the damage also does get to a point where it's just not worth taking less ammo. You know, it's uncontrolled nature and risk over reward. Instead of just taking over a smaller fella who can basically do the same job, just less dramatically. But it goes back to, if you're cracked, then yes, sure, this can be a good fun tool. But like I said, I can't deny how insanely fun this gun is. It is incredibly flawed though. So the Desert Eagle gets a C tier from me. Right, the Fowler Vanta 9. Right, so this is your premium 9mm 2011 model pistol. First off, you know, I do really like its looks, right? This fella is a very, very nice 20 rounds native to it in its little mag. This means you can blitz panic fellas with all the bullets you'll ever need. And with that, you also don't have a rabid handheld XL bully since its recoil is really nice. Nope, it feels quite flat with its projection, and lastly, its velocity is pretty good for a pistol. It makes taking these fools down from range a wee bit easier. But now on that same page, I did notice a real subtle but like intelligible rightward recoil on the gun. Just something to keep in mind, but the real predicament for me is its price. You know, at free supply, I don't really see much of a reason to pick this over like the PF 940 or literally any other 9mm. The HP Browning is one supply. I mean, seems pretty obvious because, well, this thing operates the exact same way as literally any other 9mm does. You know, you're basically just paying for the brand at this point. It's actually got nothing unique to it really. You know, with the same capacity, 9mm will not be dropping people that quick. It's more of a cushion than a deleter, whereas, I don't know, something like a 45 ACP round has less ammo but puts them down much quicker, which is fine on other 9mm because, you know, usually they're very customizable. The PF 940 with an extended mag, you know, suppressors, all that. The Fowler actually just has an incredibly strict amount of customization. You're subjected to quick draws, an optic and a laser. That's it. So even with its capacity not even really being that impressive for a 9mm, considering similar 9mm have extended mags for a wee bit more points, which gives them an insane amount of rounds, whereas the Fowler does not. The fella is a good 9mm, you know, it's not offensive, I don't have any qualms with it, but you know, there simply are just better choices. What can I say? You know, I'm not compelled to pick this fella over literally any other 9mm because, well, it's not excelling in anything or it's not really unique enough. It's controllable with good capacity, but it doesn't hit hard, not the best for value for efficiency, and it's very, very linear. If this thing was 2 points with more attachments on it, then I'd absolutely consider a low A for it. So the Fowler Vanta 9 is sitting at a B tier. So the TT33, aka the Tokarev. Ever wanted a 1911, but you know, more consistent and, well, Russian. Then welcome the TT-33. You know, despite its look, this fella hits hard using 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev rounds. This thing, despite hitting hard, is also quite controllable and simply highly accurate. Usually got a 2-shot kill with a real good penetration on it. Compared to other harder hitting pistols, this is by far one of the most consistent and reliable ones in the game, full stop. Feels pretty good at range too, you know. To me, this feels like a perfect mix between the overpowering Deagle's time to kill. It's got more accuracy and more controllability than 1911, and it's still nearly as controllable as a 9mm. But this fella does cost free supply, again, pretty pricey for a sidearm, so that is sacrificing points for your primary or armor or even grenades. Its capacity is natively low with only 8 rounds, 1+ in the chamber, so you'll have to scoop out even more points for an extended mag for only 12 rounds, which still isn't amazing, and it gets really expensive, but still, I guess you get what you pay for if you want a good pistol. So the TT-33 sits in a real nice sweet spot between the Magnums and the 45 pistols. It hits harder than the 1911 and it's much more controllable than the Deagles, although it's expensive and low mag sizes really does take a hit to it. If this fella again was 2 supply, then it will 100% be an S tier, but you know, same as the Fowler, it's a bit of a sacrifice. So the Tokarev is getting an A tier. We got the M249. First off, right, I must say I love the gunner class, right? So ammo capacity is a huge factor in my ability of suppression and area denial. So when I say light machine gun, how many bullets come to your mind in a box? 50? 100? Maybe 150? And what if I told you that the M249 carries 200 goddamn bullets in one box? And you can carry 3 boxes. That means you actually have 600 bullets for you to hold down R2 and just lay back, pop a cigar, and just enjoy the crunching bones and agonizing screams for 20 minutes. Right? This American fella has insane sustained fire, right? This is the definition of LMG in my opinion. If Insurgency Sandstorm had a deluxe LMG DLC pack or whatever, this would be the gun that's on the poster and the name, right? You know, Insurgency Sandstorm LMG bundle M249 edition. Now that would be £120, please. Anyway, this thing can lock down lanes and angles and objectives better than anything else in the game can, right? There is no challenging for the enemy against 200 goddamn bullets other than flanking or waiting half an hour for me to run out of bullets, which, well, good luck. Honestly, I kind of feel bad for anyone against this thing, right? It doesn't even give them a chance. This is just World War Z at this point. This is no Russian the gun. If it's this bad in Insurgency Sandstorm, I can only imagine how bad it was going against it in real life. But don't get me wrong, okay? Just because it's heavy and clunky doesn't mean you'll be done for when you get ambushed by a roadman, because the fire rate on this thing is pretty neat in of itself, meaning if you do panic, then shh, it's okay. It's just a guy with a bot. Yeah, well, as long as you're not going against bombers, then this gun will have your back in CQB. Sure, it does feel like controlling a DMAG CC 3801 crane, but it's better than nothing. But of course, it's a wee bit uncontrollable, so you'll have to slap a third leg on this fella, and then the recoil does become much more laser focused. Again, it just feels unfair to use, honestly. It's a bit of a cheat code. It's like using unlimited ammo on GTA 5. This gun keeps enemies pinned, alright? And this is excellent for push and defend. This is ultimately area denial, the gun, alright? Just set it up in front of the enemy spawn and it's GG's. This allows your guys to then swallow up the point and then voila, you move on to the next. And look, you missed some shots. Who the hell cares, soldier, right? It's on the citizens to pay tax for the bullets anyway. Hoorah! Given how many bullets you have, it's no surprise that its reload does take about 5 business days to restock. So you gotta be real careful picking your time to reload, since you'll be out of commission for a while. But saying this does go for most LMGs anyway, but this one especially, right? This one can end up with you being jumped pretty easily. But this type of positioning does come with the nature of the class. Now sure, its caliber is lower at 5.56 rounds, but it goes back to the point of overwhelming the enemy with so many bullets, it doesn't really matter, which in my opinion is exactly what the gunner class is for, right? If you pick gunner, your main job is to suppress the enemies. They can't progress while your team goes in, takes a point. So for me, I think this is the most benchmark LMG by the definition, right? You gotta set it up right, sure, but if you do that, man, then it's GG's, you win. There's no arguing about it. This fulfills the role of gunner excellently. So the M249 gets an S tier from me. Starting off the LMG's very, very strong. Now we got the M60. Right, so now we trade bullets for a higher caliber at 7.62, you know, real bad boy. It's got more velocity as well, more penetration, making this American thing work similar, but still better suited for longer ranges. It will still mow people down at a point, but it's definitely better suited to taking on folk over the hills compared to the previous leg. Obviously with higher damage means less bullets to kill folk. It's still got a very intimidating suppression with 100 blood clot rounds. I still feel like Rambo with this fella. Same as before, it's real good for holding those choke points, you know, just bullying folk look once again. And, you know, at this point, I might as well just choke these guys out with my ammo belt. So once again, I found this better for defensive scenarios where you'll need a little bit more range and killing power rather than just pure bullets. So this does make it a beast still, especially with the M249. It could get a bit out of control. This fella's certainly a little bit more laid back. Well, you know, as laid back as an LMG can get. However, less bullets on an LMG does mean less suppressive fire. Basically means more reloading will be needed, and there's nothing more that a gunner hates more than having to reload. It is a little bit quicker, but you'll still be huddled in a corner for a good few seconds. This does mean all the enemies now have a chance to overwhelm your position, which this problem could have been fixed with, you know, 100 more bullets. I have heard a thing as well, apparently, that the AI in this game starts charging you down when you start to reload, which does make sense. But anyway, considering how quickly people die in this game anyway with any round, you know, like you would in real life, it's a bit of a trade-off that you have to take. It's a bit of a red pill, blue pill situation, you know, more damage or more suppression. Personally, I'm taking the red pill suppression. So it's still a very good choice for fulfilling the LMG role, especially when defending a spot with folk invading from a little while away. However, I still think less bullets make it less reliable for suppressive fire, since once again, its caliber is stronger, but a 5.56 will still evaporate dudes, and that's not regarding 199 more of them. So the M60 is still great, but the M249 is still reigning supreme over it in my opinion, because it fits the role of the gunner role perfectly. So the M60 is getting an A tier from me. So the PKM. Righty, this Soviet pit bull in a chamber carries the same time to kill than the M60, you know, at 7.62 rounds. Play-wise, it feels very, very similar to the M60, however, this gun is better controlled. Well, once again, in regards of LMGs, but it's still noticeably more manageable, even without a bipod. Its penetration and velocity makes it much better for range once again. It's kind of like a sniper on Adderall. I play LMGs in pretty much every FPS possible, so I am a bit biased when it comes to how controlled an LMG is, since, well, it kind of comes with the nature of using them often. But still, even in my opinion, I still think the PKM is still a much more controlled version thus far. It's got a very nice mix in between the two previous guns, between fire rate and power. It shoots quicker than the M60 and hits harder than the M249, so it's kind of the middle ground if you can't really choose in between the two. For you indecisive folk, this one is perfect. It's still got very good suppression at 100 count bullets, so it will still put down folks quicker, but again, you trade in longevity for in the moment power, which for modes like outpost and checkpoint defense, it can be a very vital choice to make. So it's quite a versatile LMG, and it kind of just gives you the choices. Like I said before, if you can't pick in between the last two, then this one is for you. But it's as sluggish as the previous ones, obviously. It's a gun that can kind of do everything. You know, it's a jack of all trades, master of none. Not as specialized as the previous ones, but still the best of both worlds in my opinion. I personally rather take 200 bullets over more damage though. You know, sometimes bigger is better. Sorry guys. But that said and done, I'd still pick the PKM over the M60. So that means the PKM gets a high A tier from me. Now the Galil. Right, so this cosplaying LMG mostly feels like an assault rifle, which I suppose makes it unique, right? A lot of LMGs weigh an elephant's kneecap, right? Suppressing can be pretty tough, but with the Galil, it brings mobility to the table, which I'm going to be the one to assume this is why people would pick this, other than it being cheaper, of course. And which I know before someone says it in the comments,
the Galil in real life is not LMG-like.
But Insurgency likes cross-dressing gun classifications. You know, they make it play like one, so remember, this is as an LMG, right? Don't be mad at me, be mad at the game. And that's church, yo. For an LMG, the recoil is very, very handy in control compared to the previous handheld blizzards that we've come across, and, well, especially later on. All in all, being able to be used without a bipod, although I'd always recommend one if you're doing suppressing fire. It's still got very reliable damage, and especially if you group this with its fairly flexible customization, makes it by far, as an LMG, that isn't locked by the classic LMG defense role. But here's the issue, that is precisely what I'm looking for in the gunner role. Like I said, I need to cover my teammates, and this gun limits me for that role. Despite being a hybrid, it really doesn't play like an LMG. This felt a lot more natural at pressing play, aka, you know, how you play as a rifleman, just with a little bit more kick and heft to it. Now, natively it only has 35 rounds, which is laughable for an LMG. You'll only get 50 if you pay extra as well, which is a little better, but this does just make it not very good for the LMG/gunner main role, mainly sustained fire. You can't fire a thing that long if its mag has the lifespan of an Irish wolfhound. You know, this does make it quite weak at locking down lanes and angles. You know, everything about this gun kind of narrows back down to the question of why not just use a rifle, or why not just use an LMG? But even in its own niche it gets outclassed, right? There's better rifles and there's better LMGs, so it kind of just sits there, you know, nothing special. Like I said in my rifle tier list, it sits in a weird middle ground, but that said, it's a better rifle than it is an LMG. So this thing supports aggressive play, but like I said, those assault rifles better for the job. So this fella's got a little identity crisis, but it's still a good gun. It's just surrounded by better choices. So the Galil gets a B tier. Now the RPK, this is your Soviet AK-74 who went through his winter's arc. You know, instead of working hard, it just blasted itself with Trent, then proceeds to flex so hard in a skinwalker mask that it pops a hernia. Anyway, it's smaller than actual LMGs, making this LLMG super easy to handle. It's one of the easiest ones to handle on the list by far, even without a bipod. It's smooth and predictable even in full auto. And if you're a player who once again dislikes the conventional usage of the gunner class and would rather something much more proactive in pushing, then this type of gun is for you. Like I said, me personally, I prefer to lock down lanes and cover my team, but hey, each to their own. This makes its ADS much quicker compared to the other LMGs, ultimately allows you to play as an aggressive rebel, you know, pushing rather than sitting on a fence picket like a traditional LMG. You can also reposition without your knees crumbling and buckling under the weight of a portable elephant, and especially its fast reload. Wow, honestly, what's up with this gun? It seems like this is a perfect gun for hybrid play, right? Well, considering this is a gunner list, we're gonna have to keep that role in mind, because this thing basically just plays like a heavy AK, but as an LMG and the gunner role, it lacks a little bit. It at max has 75 rounds, and that's with extra points going into it as a drum mag, so you'll have to reload more often instead of rarely, so it's a bit more of a silver lining than a genuine benefit. This makes the suppression pretty weak in my opinion. It doesn't lock down lanes as hard as the previous ones, because it's not a true life LMG. It doesn't hold that constant pressure since this is just a one rifle. It even has a lower fire rate too, so really it does get outclassed. As an MG, it's less pressuring as, you know, the belt-fed does, and as a rifle, it's much less agile than real rifles, so it kind of sits in that grey area like the Galil of being in between two classes and stretches itself too thin. Like I said, there are assault rifles that do the exact same damage and are just way more mobile, so why not just pick one of those? That's of course if you just want to rock around with a massive AK-74, then fair enough, I respect it. But yeah, it doesn't really scale the defense either. There are much better options overall. This is just an AK with a drum mag, so the RPK is sitting at a B tier for me. Now the M240B. Now this American true life LMG, right, is very, very similar to our previous proper LMGs. It's the same again. Fella can mow down folk pretty quick in 1 to 2 bullets, in which you get 100, which again is pretty good for suppression. For the gunner class, you aren't really out here to gun ho. You're here to set up and pressurize the enemies, allowing your team to set up and take zone, and then defending your team and the zone like a space marine. Again, the LMG role-wise, this is very good. I do think it has much easier handling than the M60 for sure. You know, it's still rabid without a bipod, but still a little bit better. So this dog mixes power with a good fire duration, making it more of the same except being slightly easier to control. In all fairness, there's not really much you can do to change an LMG from each other. Just slap down your bipod, then this becomes a genuine laser, right? Mutilating everyone even at far range. Just like the others, if you find an ideal spot to set up, then you can lock down spawns like crazy. This fella does blend in with the other high tier LMGs. It feels like the previous LMGs, but so ever so slightly different. You know, being slightly more directed for an attribute. The M240B is your little bit more precise one. The M60 is your more powerful one. The M249 is your more high capacity one. And the more supreme one, and the PKM/Galil is the more versatile ones. So really it just comes down to your preference. There really ain't too much to differentiate them because, well, the stats are very similar, meaning all the cons for the previous ones are the same. Slow, reload, all that stuff. And despite the minor changes though, this does give the players a fairly varied selection based on the playstyles. Not every gunner wants to suppress those goddamn frauds. Obviously the price starts to go up the further down we get into this list, but if you're going as a gunner role, money isn't that big of an issue because you're going to be spending most of your stats in armor, ammo, and your LMG. I don't think I ever use a pistol in gunner class, but yeah, it's more of the same. The M240B is still a very good pick, not outshining my boy the M249, but still very, very good. Like I said, it gives the people that diversity needed, you know? Anyway, it's another A tier, what can I say? Right, the MG3. This thing is not just a gun, okay? Imagine a machine that can spit out rounds as quick as the speed of damn light. When you think of LMG, you probably think, you know, sustain fire, hold angles, suppress the enemy, you know, the regular stuff. But with the MG3, nah. Some demented German engineer woke up one day and torqued that fire rate slider to max and called it a day. The MG3 fires at an absurd rate, right? Like you tap the trigger and suddenly your 100-round belt is filed for bankruptcy. This thing shoots so fast that your biggest enemy is yourself. You'll sit at the vantage point and blast for literally a few seconds, then you're reloading wondering where it all went wrong. But here's the thing, you know, that fire rate is not just for show. This gun absolutely shreds. If someone even peeks you for half a millisecond, they are getting turned into a live leak clip. You don't even suppress anyone with this credit. You delete the bloodline. It's less area denial and more existence dissipation. You know, this bastard is the LMG version of day one release Comet Azure in Elden Ring. This is the true glass cannon build. This is basically as aggressive as you can get while sticking to the fundamentals of true life LMGs. Even in close range, if someone jumps you, you don't even need to aim properly. Just vaguely gesture in their direction and the MG3 will handle the rest. I need someone on fire in that direction. Yes, sir. We're moving that direction. Even in mid-range, it's still disgusting. You know, the sheer volume of bullets, meaning something is landing whether you like it or not. It's like throwing a bucket of 2,000 miles per hour lead at someone. Now, at long range, yeah, okay, this is where the cracks start to show. This thing does kick like it's angry at you personally. And with that fire rate, you know, controlling it without a bipod feels like trying to wrestle a shopping trolley with a jet engine strapped to it. You can make it work, but you gotta respect it, man, alright? Short bursts, mount it, treat it nicely. That said, if you do slap a bipod on it, it's a lot more controllable as usual, but still. But yeah, speaking of that fire rate, the ammo economy is a bit of a joke, you know? You will burn through belts like they're made out of paper, and reloading this thing feels like Groundhog Day, right? You better get used to it, bro. You're either shooting for 3 seconds or reloading for 3 to 5 business days, you know? There's no in between. But just know, for those 3 seconds, nobody is surviving. But that's kind of the trade-off with this gun, right? The MG3 is pure aggression, right? It rewards confidence, positioning, and knowing when to unleash absolute chaos. I'd recommend this really for players who are experienced with the LMG role and can handle the supernova torque, or at least very aggressive players who are so blinded by hate that they don't care. It's not as consistent or as forgiving as something like the M249, but in terms of raw, unadulterated, unfiltered destructive power, this thing is insane. And as far as the mainline LMGs go, this is by far the most destructive. If you get to learn it, the MG3 is an A tier. Anyway, the HK21. Now, this one's like the MG3's slightly more responsible older brother. You know, the HK21 sits in this really nice middle ground where it's not trying to bankrupt your ammo supply every time you blink. We're heading back into that very good yet very bog standard LMG. There's nothing exceptional or unique about it, to be honest. You know, we've seen it all before, like I said. This list is starting to look like my rifle tier list. There's so little you can do to actually make an LMG different. The fire rate, way more manageable than the MG3, as well anything else would be. But you can actually hold the trigger down for more than half a second without your belt evaporating into thin air. This means you get that sustained fire that the gunner roll is supposed to have. And that right there is what makes the HK21 so nice. You know, it's consistent. You can lock down angles, you can suppress, you can actually think while shooting instead of unleashing chaos and prey. Damage-wise, obviously, it still hits. You don't need a million bullets to confirm a kill, which again, helps with that ammo capacity. It's not flashy, it's just reliable violence. Now recoil, alright? Don't get it twisted. This thing isn't a laser out the box. Obviously, if you're standing up spraying like a lunatic, it will humble you pretty quick. Once again, slap a bipod on it and it's like every other LMG, absolute laser sight, mowing people down like it's your 9-to-5 job. And close range, it's solid. Not mentally demented like the MG3, but you're definitely not helpless. Same as the M60 basically. If someone pushes you, you can actually fight back without your entire box disappearing in one nervous twitch. That said, this one's a lot more expensive, basically just for an M60. There's not too much to it. I will say the main strength of the HK21 though is its balance, basically. It doesn't excel insanely in one area, but it is good at everything that a gunner needs to do. You know, I'm struggling to write anything in the script, to be honest, that I've not already covered. I will say I'll probably pick the M60 over this fella anyway, because it is more expensive, but basically not much difference. The HK21 is like the thinking man's LMG, right? It rewards good positioning, good burst, and not playing like a complete maniac. So the HK21 is yet another A tier. Look, I can't be mad at the guy, man. It's really hard to make a bad LMG. Someone in the comments will probably say,
oh, this tier list is too top heavy.
What can I say, man? Insurgency just makes all the LMGs the goddamn same, man. The only difference between these A tier LMGs thus far have been very, very minor specialties, right? Now the M250, right? I'm gonna be honest, okay? On paper, this thing sounds like a scam, right? 50 rounds on an LMG. 50. You're telling me I picked the gunner class and I dragged this big chunky LMG into battle and I've got the same ammo anxiety as a Genshin Impact player trying to talk to a woman and it's extremely expensive? Nah, man. That doesn't sound right. But when you actually use the M250, it all suddenly makes sense. Because now this isn't about how many bullets you have. It's about how many bullets actually do something. This is the complete opposite of the spectrum of the M249, right? It's selective, but still deadly. This thing is accurate, like suspiciously accurate. You fire it, and instead of the usual LMG experience, you know, screen shaking, bullets going on a worldwide tour, just every single round is just going exactly where you aimed. This gun respects you. So yeah, look, 50 rounds sounds like a con until you realize you only really need 2 to 3 of them to completely ruin someone's day. But these bullets will hit as long as your accuracy is good enough. With the other LMGs, obviously suppression's the main name of the game. But if you want to go for something that has a bit more critical hitting on it, this fella is for you. You're not wasting ammo painting outlines around enemies like the other LMGs, right? You're landing every shot. It's clean, consistent, and efficient. As I said before, I'm a suppression gunner, right? But I can appreciate an aggressive play with it. This fella is by far the most optimal for this situation. It's light and agile, allowing me to get involved in taking zones rather than me just sitting back in a window frame. So when I have a mood change, then this fella is perfect on attacking plays. Honestly, compare this thing to something like the M249, where you've got 200 rounds to suppress. This bastard is basically just the other side of the coin, you know, making it a more precise lethal done since every bullet counts. Holding angles with this thing is still disgusting. Look, you're not going to be suppressing anymore, you're just going to be straight up executing people. Someone pops their head around the spawn and they're just gone. No second chances. Just straight back to the NPC gulag, wondering what the hell just happened. And the recoil. Oh my god, right? This might be the most well-behaved LMG in the game. You can actually stay on target while firing full auto without a bipod, without feeling like you're fighting a wild animal. But even again, if you slap a bipod on this, then it basically turns into the most accurate LMG in the game with zero recoil. It basically just prints death certificates. But like I said, even without it, I have zero problem taking them down. And in my opinion, this is where the Galil and the RPK went wrong. This is how a light mobile aggressive LMG should work. Close range, it's still very solid because it's so controllable and it's very light compared to the previous guns. You can actually track people properly instead of panic spraying and hoping recoil RNG saves you. If your aim is decent, you'll be winning these fights easy. Now, like I said, the 50 round belt does mean you can't play like an absolute lunatic. You know, you've got to be a bit more intentional, you know, burst, reset, pick your shots. So if you want to be a bit more tactical in the gunner class over being conventional, this is so good, right? Which again, is always good to have variety in this class because, you know, everyone plays different. This thing slaps and I can still recognize that despite it not being my playstyle. That's how good this thing is. And reloads, look, it's still an LMG reload, so if you mess up your timing, you're going to get sent to the shadow realm mid-animation. This thing feels light as hell too, like polymer, right? It's like a foam gun that just shoots destruction. Its hip fire, spray and pray CQB potential is insane as well. The amount of zones I can clear, you know, kills I can pile up, last man stands I can make with this thing is absolutely insane. But that again, that is the trade-off, and honestly, it's a fair one. Obviously, alongside it being very expensive. You get what you pay for, because in return, you get a gun where every bullet matters, and more importantly, every bullet actually hits and kills. It removes the biggest attacking weakness that LMGs have for a genuine attacking play, you know, wasted ammo, and it replaces that with pure efficiency. As a gunner main, there's nothing worse as me being the last one standing, and I have to rush in and take an objective with a huge crane in my hand that has really slow ADS and insane recoil. So for those scenarios, I would really love to have this on me, especially if you've got like close range maps as well. I would always pick this gun over the M249, whereas a long range map, I definitely pick the M249 anyway. Like I said, you're still laying down pressure with this thing, but you're also just picking people off like it's a DMR. Once again, this is the other side of the pond. It depends on the scenario. For defense, I'll pick the M249, and for attacking, I'll pick the M250. So the M250 gets an S tier with me alongside the M249. Alright, the M24. This fella is your classic all-American bolt action. To be fair, quite straightforward as you could possibly get, you know? No gimmicks, no flashy nonsense, just you, your scope, and the very real responsibility of actually hitting your shot. Don't look at me like that, alright? I said you. And that's the thing with this gun and other upcoming bolt actions, you know? If you miss, then well, good luck, man. You'll be sat there pulling that bolt back like you're in a historical reenactment while the crackhead you just whiffed is now bolting at you with bad intentions and licking of the lips. This, of course, doesn't count if you're camping on top of a shack 15 miles away. If you do hit, then they are absolutely cooked, right? This thing hits hard. Upper chest, head, it doesn't matter. People are dropping. It's clean, it's satisfying, it's that proper sniper experience where one shot actually means something, you know? Sure, it's skill rewarding and certainly isn't optimal. Come on, man, you gotta give some credit for something being so fun to use.
Ah, Freeman.
Now, handling wise, yeah, it's alright. It's not terrible. It's not amazing though. You're not exactly quick scoping like it's COD, but you're also not stuck in slow motion. It sits right in that middle ground where it's usable, but it's not going to bail you out if your positioning is bad. The best part about it is by far its value. It's cheap as hell. So for what you pay, you actually get quite a bit, although it's still limited. So yes, you get more for what you pay for, but really don't expect elite level stuff, alright? This does mean you can whale out on attachments, which is very handy for outpost. And that's really the story of the M24 fella, you know? It's just good. It's kind of like a baseline sniper. No crazy fire rate to save you, no semi-auto follow-ups, no panic spam. It forces you to play properly as a sniper, you know, holding angles, picking your shots, you know, don't get greedy basically. Like I said, as stereotypical as a sniper can get. Now in mid to long range, this is your home with this old head, right? You post up, you watch a lane, and you just start deleting people one by one like you're checking names off a list.
You just made the list!
But close range though, it's far out. If someone does get up in your face, it's basically a coin flip, alright? right? You either land the nastiest quickscope of your life, or you get folded while working that bolt like a 40-year-old lady of the night in the cold streets of Nevada. And it won't be the sniper that shoots a blank first. I will say, I'm not a massive fan of its looks though. I'm more of a glazed wood kind of guy.
Oh, hell no!
No, look, it's not bad, far from it. You know, in the right hands, this thing is deadly. But it doesn't give you much room for error, and it doesn't really have that extra flexibility that some of the further rifles bring. You know, it's solid, it's reliable, it gets the job done, but it's not carrying you like the upcoming guns. So the M24 is getting a B tier from me. Now the MoreSirHoward. Alright, this one feels like it was pulled straight out of a museum, dusted off and then handed to you with a good look by some Russian dude called Konstantin Kutuzov with the meanest mustache you'll ever see. The MoreSirHoward is as old school as it possibly gets, right? No fancy attachments once again, no modern comfort, just raw, cheap, historical. It's kind of starting to sound like that 40-year-old lady from before. But anyways, well, if it worked back then it will work nowadays. And it certainly does. This thing does hit like a truck, alright? You land a shot and the fella's getting PTSD as if he was in Stalingrad himself. People aren't surviving that unless the game decides to bless them personally with, you know, really good hitboxes. You know, it's got that same satisfying one-shot potential where every trigger pull feels powerful. You know, as said before, it is one of the snipers that you think of first. I love the glossy wood designs old guns have, right? Modern guns are just like 15 shades of green and tan, plastic and polymer. I miss art in guns, alright? Although that said and done, it does feel illegal to put a rail on this fella. But oh my days, right? Using it feels like you're operating a piece of farming equipment. The bolt is slow as hell. I know WD-40 wasn't a thing back then, but god damn, this is a rusty boy, alright? The same as the M24. Now the handling is chunky, you know, I can feel the age from this absolute dinosaur, you know? Same again, you miss a shot with this thing and you've got enough time to reflect on your life choices, and that's where the MoreSirHoward starts to struggle. You know, it's not forgiven at all. Positioning matters more, aim matters more, timing matters more. There is zero room for panic, you know? You don't get a quick follow-up, you don't get a second chance unless the enemy just messes up. Or once again, if you're just perched on a fence picket like a shoe bill 5 miles away. But if you are disciplined, and if you are landing your shots consistently, this thing will absolutely put people in the ground. Long range especially, right? It's beautiful. You're lining up, take a breath, click, right? Someone across the map is now on a t-shirt. And I do have to reiterate that using this fella does put hair on your chest. It has a lot more charm than the M24 in my opinion. You know, I really love this gun, despite it obviously not being the most meta gun in the game. It has its charm and I love it. Another good thing is it's also quite common to find on enemy AI, so the ammo economy is actually pretty good. How informed for a USSR gun. And as said, it's super cheap too. You are limited to 5 rounds, but you can get a stripper clip which makes reloading super quick, which is something the M24 doesn't have. But close range though, yeah, nah, good luck. This hit has to hit, otherwise it's GG's, you know? High risk, high reward every single time. If a rebel comes up to you from behind, and you might as well just put his hand on your shoulder and say Salamu alaikum, because you're basically done here. And honestly, compared to the upcoming rifles, it just does feel a bit unforgiving without giving you too much in return. Like, yeah, sure, it hits hard. So do other guns that don't feel like you're cranking a medieval door handle between shots. Basically in PvE, where enemies charge very quickly, it's decently possible to get absolutely overwhelmed. Even in PvP, if you flunk your shot, then you're getting outgunned by pretty much every other gun in the game. Like I said with the M24, it's not bad. It's actually very solid if you know what you're doing. It's really cheap as well, makes it really good for outpost early game, but it does demand a lot from you and doesn't exactly give you too much back in terms of flexibility or support. The MoreSirHoward isn't here to carry you, alright? Pretty much all responsibilities rely solely on you. However, I do prefer the MoreSirHoward. Even stat-wise, it is slightly better than the M24. So the MoreSirHoward gets a B tier from me, just above the M24. Alright, the L96A1. Now this is where things start to feel a bit more professional. Now the L96A1 is like the M24 went off and got 80 million power in Rise of Kingdoms.
I've got 80 million power in Rise of...
First off, you feel the upgrade immediately. The handling is cleaner. The whole gun just feels more refined. You're not handling your great granddad's rifle anymore, right? Now it is still a bolt action, you know, don't get it twisted. If you miss, you're still going to be doing the whole bolt animation of shame, but it just feels smoother operated. And the accuracy, oh yeah, right? This thing is crisp. You line up a shot and it goes exactly where you wanted. You know, no aged awareness, no excuses. If you miss, then it's on you. And the gun makes that very clear. And the damage wise, it's the same story as you'd hope. You know, people are dropping. Upper body, headshot, doesn't really matter. This thing hits hard enough to make sure your shots actually count. It's got that proper sniper feel as well, where every kill feels earned, but also consistent. Now, where the L96 really shines is that balance between power and usability. Now, it's still punishing if you mess up, but it's not fighting you like some of the other older rifles. You can reposition and reacquire targets, and you're still stay in control of fights way more comfortably. Now mid to long range, this is your playground. You post up, you hold angles, and you just start picking people off like you're clocking in for work. Now again, at close range it's still risky, but it is slightly less terrifying than some of the other previous bolt actions because, like I said, the handling is smoother. You got at least a chance to snap onto someone if they push you. Look, it's not exactly ideal, but it's not instant doom either. Due to being less of an unk too, you have access to extended mags and grease bolts. So overall, it's a faster reload with even more rounds, and the bolt is quicker as well. You know, stripper mags are also good for the previous one, but you had to dump out all your rounds. Otherwise, you'd just be sitting in a slow-ass reload animation. But with mags, that isn't really a problem. Another great thing is that it comes with the bipod automatically attached, so you're kind of saving money there. Sure, this does mean you can't attach any underbarrels. I really only use bipods with snipers anyway, so for only 2 supplies, that's pretty good value. Now, the downside, naturally, it is still a bolt action at the end of the day. You know, no follow-up spam, no safety net. If someone does backshot you, then it's going to be tough. Now, the problem with Insurgency Sandstorm usually rewards fast follow-up shots, you know, and objective pressure rather than just perfect long-range sniping in PvE. Obviously, it's a different story for PvP, of course, but, well, PvP is as desolate as a Tatooine desert. It's no surprise that semi-auto DMRs often outperform bolt actions simply because missing ones with the L96 can lose a fight, while an M110 or an SVD gets an immediate second shot. This is vital in outpost and checkpoint due to the absolute vile amount of enemies. You do gotta hit your shots or you're gonna be punished, simple as. And it doesn't have any crazy gimmick. You know, it's just really good at what it does. It's just a straight up improvement from the previous guns we've mentioned. Now, it's not broken, it's not carrying bad aim, but it is reliable, clean and deadly in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing. If you do play as a true sniper, sat in the back, then this is one of the best bolt actions in the game. So the L96A1 is like your sniper promotion weapon, right? It's a true sniper rifle. So the L96A1 is getting an A tier from me. Alright, the TAC 338. This fella is eerily similar to the L96, alright? And that's because, well, it's kind of basically the same gun, just with less ammo and the choice to have an underbarrel this time. So the TAC 338 is what happens when the devs realise, well, they kind of need a similar gun for the other faction. The first thing you notice is that it's quite maneuverable for a bolt action compared to our previous. Once again, it's balanced outright power and mobility, but that said, it's still a bolt action. Exact same as the L96, let's not sugarcoat it. Now, you set it up, you get comfortable, and you accept that you're going to be addicted to headshotting everyone in view. Oh my days, this thing does not shoot bullets, it shoots pure democracy. If you hit someone, there's no debate, you know, they're just smushed. The damage is so overkill that you start questioning if it can even get better, but well, spoilers, it does. Accuracy wise, it's pretty naughty, I'm not gonna lie to you. You line up your shot and it will land precisely where you aim, as long as there's no dude from Botswana in your lobby with 800 ping. And again, long range, this is its natural habitat, you know, you can pick off people across ridiculous distances like you're operating an extremely angry telescope. This way you're hardly in risk of being counter-attacked when you do flunk a shot, which is most likely where you're going to be sat out with a bolt action anyway. But here is the trade-off, you know, you're not mobile in the same way as lighter rifles or even upcoming DMRs that we're going to talk about, as running around and uncurrently firing, which obviously can get you caught and well, just straight up killed. But as far as bolt actions go, it is pretty mobile, I guess. Close range, once again, just don't try it. If someone rushes you, you're either going to land the most desperate no-scope of your life, or you're going to end up becoming a final kill cam. As said, it's still a bolt, but at least it does have a magazine reload, which makes quality of life even better. Obviously, it has a faster reload. You can attach a greased bolt on this. It's just quicker than the first two. And that's the thing, you know, it doesn't want speed. You know, you're not going to be running around gunning everyone, obviously, but it does trade everything for absolute authority on impact. You know, one shot, one problem removed. So as far as traditional sniper rifles go, this is pretty much one of the top dogs. It's not as flexible or as forgiving as some of the most balanced rifles, of course, but when it lands in the way that most weapons in this game just cannot match. That said, I do prefer the L96 since, well, with this fella you trade the fact that you can equip any underbarrel, but you have not got any access to an extended mag, leaving you solely with 5 rounds, and 5 rounds ain't a lot to work with, especially in PvE. So the TAC 338 is very similar to the L96, you know, with a small trade-off being underbarrels instead of more ammo. Like I said, I prefer the L96 since it gives me a free bipod and 10 rounds. Sounds lovely if you ask me. So the Don gets an A tier just under the L96A1. Alright, here we are, the M1 Grand. We all know him and we all love him, right? This one isn't a sniper rifle, I know, but Insurgency treats it like one. You know, it's in the marksman class, so I'm going to count the fella. Here we got something new. He's a semi-auto fella instead of a bolt action, which is kind of a plus. You know, you got 8 rounds to your name and it'll start ego challenging pretty much everything. The M1 Garand is basically an old head who still wants to be enlisted because he doesn't have PTSD, he has nostalgia. First thing, you feel the rhythm of it immediately, so you're not going to be locked into bolt action, slow ass suffering, but it's not as R2 spam as some of the upcoming DMRs, but it certainly gives you a lot more wiggle room though. When you shoot, you aren't immediately punished for missing. You are punished when you have to reload though, since it has an extremely slow one. But I guess you could argue the ping kind of does make it worth it. That said, it is free supplies, so you know, it's not super pricey, but compared to the M24, the Musin, it's substantial, alright? Basically, you're paying 2 more supply for a semi-auto and 3 more bullets. And when you land your shots, it hits very, very hard. Like, you know, this isn't a pea shooter at all. I think due to like Call of Duty, people don't realize how strong this dude is. He does hit like a tank. Once again, you connect upper body torso shots and people go down quick, alright? That is, however, if you can hit them because the attachments aren't great. It feels like a crime to put a scope on this dude. Nope. Alongside all the other attachments, they are actually quite limited due to its age. And that said, its penetration, fire rate, and velocity is quite a bit lower than our previous guns. And now the recoil is suppressing the last few guns, I must say. It's literally off the scale. Look, in a panic situation, it will certainly qualify as a bit of an unnerving attribute. This does mean you basically got to pick your shots, otherwise your arms are literally in the air. It doesn't quite feel like a laser beam like the other guns, and its accuracy isn't also as pinpointed as the actual snipers due to this guy being a battle rifle. So look, I'm not exactly surprised due to this guy being an unk, but this is the big thing with the M1 Garand. Versatility, you know, this is where the Garand sits in a weird spot, right? It's not slow enough to feel like a traditional precision rifle, and it's not fast enough to compete with the true spammy semi-autos that we're coming up against. You're kind of in this middle zone where you can kind of do everything, but nothing feels effortless, right? As cool as it is, it does feel a little bit restricting. Yep. At mid-range, it's solid, and I'd personally say this is one of its strongest points, since you absolutely can win fights if you're accurate and disciplined enough. Like I said, if you're going to start panic firing, good luck, because you're going to be looking at the sky. Now, at long range, it's not as good, but it does work, technically, but you're going to feel the lack of scope flexibility and the precision compared to the other dedicated rifles. Now, at close range, this is where it gets a little bit spicy. Look, you can fight up close, but you're not exactly built for panic flicking and rapid target switching. Look, you miss a couple shots, and suddenly you're jamming your thumb into the bastard. The iconic ping is cool and all, but gameplay-wise, you commit into a full reload cycle that can absolutely get you punished if you misjudge timing. Look, it's not fast, it's not forgiving, it's just part of the ritual, alright? It does look sexy though, I must admit, obviously. It's as classic as it gets. That said, due to being a classic, once again, its attachments are very, very limited, especially with being stuck with clips. Look, at least you have 8 rounds, and of course that amazing ping, but just be careful with your thumb, man, alright? That said, free supply for something just as comparable as the Musin or the 24, which, let me remind you, costs 1 supply, so you're basically paying for the brand at this point. So yeah, look, it's reliable, it's punchy, it's satisfying, but it doesn't really dominate any specific range or role enough to climb higher. So this unk is getting a big tier from me. Alright, now the M82A1CQ. Now for the small price of 3 supply points, you can carry the BFG from Doom using fat 50 BMG anti-material rounds. Look, let me preface that, anti-material. So the M82A1CQ is an absolute monster in concept for sure, but look, it's a 50 cal anti-material rifle chopped down into a slightly more close quarter friendly package, which is absolutely hilarious because nothing about firing a cannon indoors should ever be described as close quarters, but you would be surprised. Now, first thing, impact, right? This thing doesn't snipe enemies. It literally ragdolls them into the tarmac. It doesn't exactly matter where it is on the body, you know, the target is basically just gone. It's that classic 50 cal experience, you know, it's such a cool experience, like, need I say how dope a 50 cal is? But the CQ bit is where things start to get a little interesting and, well, especially chaotic. You know, it is compact, sure, based off its longer variant, but don't let that fool you into thinking it's nimble. You are still dragging around a weapon that feels like it's got its own gravitational field. That said and done, it does have surprisingly excellent CQB potential. It's probably because the bullet is so fat that it feels like it takes up the entire hallway. That is, of course, if you can fit it in the hallway in the first place. I don't need to say this, but its penetration and recoil and power is literally off the chart. But the recoil, like I said, it's really there. Like, it's not just recoil. This is like a human-sized supernova going through your shoulder, right? You fire a shot and the gun basically headbutts your chin. Look, you can control it, but you're never fully in charge. You gotta be like Hulk Hogan or something to hit fire this fella. Where it actually shines is mid to close range engagements for a sniper rifle. If someone does punish you and you do land that shot, then it's just instantly over, like literally just gone. And that alone does make it terrifying in the right hands, but you know, consistency is the issue. It is a fat 50 cal in a game where timing matters a lot. If you miss your shots in hectic situations, then you're absolutely in trouble. The follow-up is not coming fast at all, and the weapon is not forgiving you for panic aiming. You know, the fire rate is naturally incredibly slow, so pace your shots. You know, long range, it is actually quite disgusting though. You know, it absolutely performs in its intended role there. You know, anything you hit in range is basically removed from the match. Compared to the more dedicated long range rifles, it feels a lot more awkward to consistently handle because of its weight and recoil. You know, with its ADS and equipping is of course very long time to take it out, so you kind of just got to work around it like a tortoise. It doesn't really have much for attachments either. You have an extended mag giving you 10 BMG rounds. Stands for big motherfucking gun. What can I say? It's not an elegant sniper. Really, it's like a sniper that's meant to be in the demolition class. It's incredibly powerful, but not smooth enough or flexible enough to be consistently dominant. When it works, it really works, but when it doesn't, you feel every bit of that awkward handling. So this behemoth is gonna sit at a B tier for me. Alright, now the M99. You know, the devs looked at the M82 and thought, well, we need something bigger. Now enter the M99, the Insurgents version. And I must say, there isn't much else different except having a few extra inches, which I must say does get in the way. The M99 is one of those guns that feels like it should be terrifying, and look, it is, but it's in a very specific, very controlled situations. And outside of that, it's a commitment you didn't fully agree to. First thing, right, you notice the weight. This thing isn't something you casually swing around. Every movement feels deliberate. You feel like you're dragging a piece of heavy machinery into a position before you even think about shooting. And look, once you commit to a sightline, you're kind of staying there until you really want to suffer and move around even more. And probably by the time you've already set everything up, the enemies have probably already disappeared from the sightlines because the fella took your ass 30 minutes to get ready. Now, compared to the M82 being a shorter 50 cal, that made it a little bit more maneuverable. Compared to this fella, he just gets in the way of every single wall that you see. You're basically just going to end up spending your entire match either in an open field or on top of a rooftop. But here's the problem. Obviously, it feels super clunky, you know, even more than the M82 for being, well, just a bigger version. The handling is slow in a way that really matters. You know, not just movement speed, but everything about it. Aiming, repositioning, recovering from shots, equipping it. Very slow RPM and extremely high recoil. And look, again, if you miss, yeah, that's where things are going to get rough because the follow-up is not quick at all. And in a game where people move as fast as they do and punish hesitation really quick, the M99 really doesn't give you a safety net. Mid-range is kind of where it tries to exist, but even then it still feels really awkward. You're often over-committing to a shot or struggling to backtrack to a different position to follow the moving target smoothly because of how heavy and deliberate this weapon feels, right? Long range is obviously its intended use, you know, and when everything lines up, it's absolutely devastating. But you kind of just play this thing like a snapping turtle sitting there for 5 hours until someone walks in front of your line of sight. And for me, it just doesn't feel consistent enough to justify how restrictive it is. You're basically gambling on whether your positioning and timing is perfect because, well, there's very little forgiveness built into the gun itself. I mean, I will say these guns are good against vehicles, I suppose, even though I would still prefer to bring an RPG. But close range, again, if someone pushes you, you are not fighting back, alright? You're hoping physics intervenes in your favor. But like I said, you could get lucky since a 50 cal bullet is so fat it takes up a lot of space. You can kind of just aim and hope it hits them. And that really is the issue, right? The M99 has insane power on paper, but in practice, it just feels so slow, restrictive, and punishing in a way that really doesn't feel worth it compared to any other options that give you a little bit more flexibility, even the previous 50 cal. My main gripe again is with its length, right? It gets caught on everything so often. This on top of the struggles that 50 cal rifles already have, it just enhances it even more. This is like the Desert Eagle of those sniper rifles. It's devastating when everything goes right, but everything has to go right. And in actual gameplay, it's just not going to happen often enough. I still would have taken the M82 over this thing, but all above else, I'd even take the M1 Garand over it. So look, the fella's getting a C tier from me. Alrighty, the M110 SAS. This is where things stop becoming sniping and more of being controlled execution, alright? This thing is very similar to my shotgun tier list, where something has been manufactured for years and years. It is inevitable that the models will improve until the modern day. I'm a medieval bloke, as you can tell from my profile, and well, look at me. Somehow I ended up doing gun videos, but anyway, look in the past, alright? Starting off with cavemen with long sticks, to Middle Ages spears, and now spears attached to long sticks that fire bullets. This fella is semi-auto with 10 rounds up to 20 rounds with extremely modern attachments. You know, it's very controllable, decent fire rate, and a strong ass velocity and penetration. The first thing you will notice with this thing is its ease of use in all range, right? You miss a shot and it's not really a problem anymore. You're not sitting there cranking a bolt like it's the 1890s. You just, you know, correct it and keep firing. That alone changes everything. And again, this is different to previous semi-autos because this DMR is literally just pure improvements to the age M1 Garand. And now the firepower, it's really nice. What can I say? This thing hits like a proper DMR DMR should. It's stronger than the SKS and easier to use than the M1. And all above else, it has better accuracy than anything else, other than the precision rifles. Upper torso shots are doing serious work, and headshots are just overkill. You know, it's consistent, it's punchy, and it doesn't feel like you need a perfect condition to get value from it. The real strength though is its follow-up pressure. You can actually stay in fights more than 3 seconds. If someone ducks behind cover, wait there until they re-peek and then pop the gun. You can adapt mid-engagements, which is huge since this game really does reward aggressive gameplay. The recoil is there, but it's controlled enough to feel like you're managing it rather than fighting it. You can actually stay on target and track moving enemies without feeling like your screen's trying to escape from your hands. Mid-range is where this thing absolutely thrives. It's disgusting there, right? You're not quite a sniper sitting miles away, sure, but you're just in this perfect in-between menace, locking down sightlines and deleting anyone who tries to move through them. This does mean you're more of an asset for your team as well. There are situations where you have to go and pick up a checkpoint, so this one's much more forgiving for those situations. At long range, it's still very solid. It's not a bolt action precision level sniper, but it absolutely holds its own if you got decent aim and positioning. You can reliably win duels at a distance without needing pixel perfect perfection. You still have access to a lovely long range scopes as well, especially the really cool 6 to 3 times DOS scope. Close range, it's surprisingly not terrible. You're still not designed for it, but because it's semi-auto and controllable, you can actually have a fighting chance. Much better than any gun so far. If someone rushes you, you can dump shots fast enough that a panic doesn't equal death. Look, it is a little bit more expensive at Force Supply natively, not including everything else you'll need to slap on it, but personally I think you pay for what you get, especially with the bonus of being mag-fed, ultimately making it really quick compared to everything else so far. And that's really the identity of M110. It's consistency with aggression, you know, it doesn't rely on perfect shots, it doesn't force you into long recovery windows, and it doesn't punish you for existing in a slightly bad situation, allowing you to basically just adapt to everything that this game throws at you. It's flexible, deadly, and forgiving enough to stay usable even in chaos, and it's still strong enough to dominate when played properly. This one gives you the biggest wiggle room for error that we've come across so far. It's just a real bad boy, alright? So the M110 SASS gets an S tier from me. Alright, here we are, the SVD. This one is a true problem solver demon, right? Same again, it's super adaptive. This fella does even more damage. I mean, look, it does get to a point where you really don't need any more damage, but hey, I ain't complaining. So the SVD is basically the definition of controlled aggression. It's not about waiting forever for the perfect shot, you know? This is a DMR, and this is basically just technical advancement. It sits right in that sweet spot where you actively run fights from mid-range to long range, even in close range if you're confident enough. First thing, you feel the cadence instantly. It's semi-auto once again, but it feels rhythmic. It sounds so good and it feels amazing. You shoot correct, shoot again. Same as the M110. Obviously in the marksman role you want to stay composed instead of panicking, but look, it definitely covers your front when you have to. And the damage, like I said, absolutely fire, right? Upper torso shots are always dangerous. Headshots again are just overkill. Even the body shots feel meaningful. You're not just tickling people into cover like the SKS. You're actively winning the engagement with every single click. This is a very, very optimal tool. What makes the SVD shine though is how forgiving it is. You miss a shot, fine. You're not locked into a bot animation once again with some long ass recovery. You're already lining up your next one. That alone makes it insanely strong in real matches where targets don't stand still and politely wait for their turn. Especially with DMRs having a faster reload and more ammo. It's kind of just a no-brainer really, unless you're just Doomslayer or Seymour Howard. Mid-range, this is where the thing becomes disgusting. You're dictating fights over here, right? People peek, they get tapped. GG's. They try to reposition, they get tagged again. It's consistent pressure without needing perfect aim or setup. It feels really lightweight as well, these DMRs compared to the previous guns. It doesn't feel like you're slugging around a chunk of metal. And at long range, it's still very solid. Look, it's not a pure sniper, obviously, but it still holds its own. If you're steady and patient, you can win duels at a distance without feeling like you're at a disadvantage. Once again, having modern attachments, going from scopes, extended mags, all that good stuff. Close range, it's still surprisingly playable. You're not built for panic rolls again, but because it's semi-auto and consistent, you can still absolutely clutch awkward pushes if your aim's on point. And I must say again, the Soviet and well, really any old gun have beautiful wooden embellishers on them, and the steel is so stylish. It's such a sleek, beautiful gun, honestly. And that's really the SVD's identity. It's complete consistency under pressure. It doesn't demand perfection for sure, but it does reward precision and still gives you a lot of wiggle room. It lets you stay aggressive without having to fall apart the moment anything goes wrong. It's flexible, reliable, lethal at pretty much every relevant range, and it never really feels like it's holding you back. The only real competitor in this category category is the M110 and, well, obviously the last rifle on this list. The SVD, slightly higher recoil, is balanced by its raw stopping power and aggressive feel. Look, the SVD isn't just a DMR, it's a complete dominator if you play it right. So the SVD is getting an S tier from me. I'm putting it over the M110 because, look, I just prefer the SVD. Righty, now we got the Mark 14 EBR. Once again, it's a DMR that just completely locks in. The Mark 14 EBR is one of those guns that instantly feels serious, right? I mean, you would hope so considering how pricey it is, but anyway, you pick it up and it instantly feels like every lane you see is yours. The first thing is its damage is absolutely disgusting. This thing feels like it's offended by the concept of surviving. Upper torso shots are consistently lethal territory, as well all DMRs are. There's no drama, no delay, they're just gone. But what really pushes the Mark 14 is it's super aggressive and it lets you stay in fights. Similar to the previous M110 and the SVD, you do save money when it comes to mag sizes since this guy already comes with 20 rounds. So sure, it is 5 supply points natively, but it does cost 20 more for the M110 and the SVD, already costing 4 supply. So technically you're saving 1 point. That's not including obviously the scopes and stuff, but anyway. The semi-auto fire rate is really what makes this thing terrifying though. Again, you can correct your shots, miss a shot, it's completely fine. You just adjust and immediately punish the same target. 2 enemies peek, you don't even panic. You just start working through them like it's a checklist. This has the best, fastest fire rate out of all the DMRs that we've come across, so that really works towards it for something. The recoil is there, it's not polite, it is harsher than the other 2 DMRs, but it's still more controllable enough than skilled players can absolutely turn it into a laser of consequences. And that's kind of like a price you gotta pay. In my opinion, that's not too bad. Once you learn the rhythm, it stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like pure pressure. Mid-range is where this thing becomes completely unfair. You know, anyone trying to cross an open ground is basically taking a gamble with very, very bad odds. You see movement, you click, and suddenly that movement is no longer a thing. Simple as, really. Long range, again, as over DMRs, it's still solid. You can consistently win duels if your aim is steady and usual. You're not forced into that one-shot or die playstyle like other rifles. And close range, again, is where it gets a bit spicy. Most DMRs and sniper rifles start sweating as soon as someone starts rushing towards them. The Mark 14 just keeps shooting. If your aim holds, you can absolutely melt aggressive pushes before they even fully develop. And that's because, once again, this dude has an insane fire rate for a DMR, including full auto for CQB. This personally is a huge quality of life change since sometimes I have to take a zone on my own. This gun does take hints from its other Mark brothers and just kind of covers all bases without losing quality, alongside real good attachments. But like I said, it is expensive, but it is the full package, I think. And that's the core identity, you know? It's not just powerful, right? It's responsive power that covers all bases. It gives you stopping power and the ability to instantly adapt to chaotic fights. That combination is why it feels so oppressive when used well. So this cracked on gets an S tier from me. Right, that's all the guns in this game, right? There's quite a few guns in this game, so I'll just give you a minute to look at the list. And yeah, so how's your day been? Good? Nice. Yeah, no, I've been good. Anyway, yeah, I hope they have more guns in this game. You know, it's kind of a far cry to get an update, but we got 2 new pistols, but I do hope some of the other gun classes get some love. If you did enjoy, please like and subscribe. It really does help me out. There is only one more video for Insurgency Sandstorm left, which is the map tier list. After that, we'll be moving on to Stalker, which is, I'm excited. I love that franchise. I have a second channel where I just post, like, silly little gameplay videos. It's mostly a memory bank for me and my friends, but hey, you guys might like it. It's kind of funny. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.